right, we are. It says we are live, so we
That's
should
the
be.
mystery. Are we really live yet?
Are we really live? I think we're probably really live. So for those who can see, please let us know if everything looks and sound fine. But welcome everyone. This is the On Just Restart podcast. We do it every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and this week we have Rob from Rule of Two Review. He's returned, and we also got Brandon from WhataboutNintendo.
Hi.
How you guys doing?
Hello. Good. Thank you guys so much for having me back on, man. Really stoked to talk about all the insanity that is Nintendo over the past 7 days.
Oh man,
so.
it is just nuts right now.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about, and for those who are curious, what we're going to be talking about today, the biggest focus is going to be the Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcase, which is kind of a mouthful. But yeah, we're going to be focusing on that and sort of talking about like what that was, our expectations going into it, all like the rumors surrounding it, and then afterwards, and the fallout and the fan backlash, and what it kind of all means, or what we think it means from our perspectives. Like that's the focus of the discussion today. But there's also a few other little cool things going on this week as well. There's been some discussion about maybe Brie Larson, the actress. She's been saying she wants to play as Samus in a Metroid movie. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, how we sort of think a Metroid movie could play out. And we're also going to talk a little bit about these leaks for everything that is old Nintendo games. The biggest one being, or the one that everyone's really talking about, is Luigi actually being in the coding for Mario 64. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and maybe sort of tying that into the Mario remasters and things of that nature. And that's the general plan for today. So that's going to probably give us a pretty full discussion, but those in the chat, feel free to ask us all sorts of questions. If you add us, it's better and easier for us to get to it. But that's the general plan. But before we jump into that, how have your weeks been? What have you guys been doing?
Well, I've finally started to catch up on Paper Mario, gaming-wise at least, you know.
Yeah.
Because I've been really busy with Ghost of Tsushima. You know, that was the big battle with those two games on the same day, and I was more excited for Ghost of Tsushima, and the game is amazing. But obviously, I know we don't really talk too much about non-Nintendo stuff
We could
here.
touch on it because I want that game.
Yeah. I really want that game too.
Yeah.
Like I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but I play Microsoft and Sony games all the time, so we bring them up all the time.
Okay, good call. I mean, the only thing I'll say is, I mean, it just, to me, it lives up to the hype, and that open world is so amazing. It's like if Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn and The Witcher had a baby, is kind of what I think that open world feels like.
Okay.
So, and the samurai combat's so great.
I
And
haven't
it's beautiful, of course.
too much gameplay of it, but from the little I've seen, it kind of reminds me of Dark Souls.
I guess I could see that a little bit, you know.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people were drawing comparisons to like Sekiro, which obviously is the Dark Souls team making.
Right.
But it's really actually kind of not that. It's hard, like how Dark Souls is a hard game, but the combat's pretty different. The combat is definitely different.
I heard it's more like the Batman, like Arkham style combat, like slow.
Yes.
You're taking on multiple enemies at once, and you're switching between them, and blocking and parrying and all that kind of stuff.
It's exactly that. That's way more what it's like for sure, and it's really, really good and satisfying. But it is hard. But because of go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say because of that, it took me a couple days to get to Paper Mario, but then I finally got to Paper Mario, and it's a good game. I've had a little bit of a roller coaster, but I'm mostly riding high on it. I think it's pretty solid, and as I said on Twitter a little bit ago, it's definitely gotten better the more I've played it. I have a couple of issues with it here and there, but it's a good game. It's it's been really divisive, but I think it's good. I'm not a Paper Mario guy, so my opinion probably counts differently to people, but I've liked it so far. You know?
I mean, I'm a diehard Thousand Year Door fan, and I still am really enjoying the game. I haven't played it as much as I want to.
Yeah, you should hate this game.
According to the internet, I should be absolutely livid about this game. I was about Sticker Star. Color Splash a little bit, but this one, they're heading in a better direction than they were. I still don't like the battle system as much as I liked the original RPG battle system, but I like it. It's interesting. The lack of XP is kind of annoying, but everything surrounding the game is great. So I feel like people focus too much on the battle system and not the rest of it made Paper Mario awesome.
Wasn't like the partners was like a really big deal for people too, and there's really not that in this game.
I think
just story-wise, not really gameplay-wise, yeah.
Right. That was kind of the best thing about partners in Thousand Year Door, though, was just what they added to the story. Like, they added some elements to, like, combat, but it wasn't, like, crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what the partners do in this game is just barely anything. Like, sometimes
I will admit, it's barely anything.
Like, sometimes they just opt to not even come with you. Like, oh, no, you know what? I'm just gonna take a break, guys. You go on ahead without me. I'll just sit here on this bench. But when they do fight, they're like, okay, if you somehow leave one enemy behind, there's like a 50% chance I will not trip, and I will take this guy out for you. Maybe. That's pretty much what they do.
I find it happens most of the time, but yeah, there's definitely times where you
maybe I just have worse luck than you.
Trips. You're like, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is not that cool.
So I guess like maybe I'll do some sort of review like thing once I finish Paper Mario, but I really do feel like, as someone who isn't like a long-term fan like you, Rob, I just think it's a good game. Like, when I just judge it on its merits alone, not comparing it to the previous games, I just think it's a good game. And I don't think it's perfect. Like you alluded to some of the like imperfections. Like, I think the tutorials are a little slow. I wish
so bad. The hand
a lot of talking.
Yeah.
A lot of talking, man.
There is
a lot of unnecessary
a little bit too much talking.
Because I like
some of the dialogue
fun
is good, but
yeah.
I think they just need to cut the fluff. Like, they have some really good dialogue, but they also have some just like filler stuff where like Olivia popping out to be like Navi and just telling you where to go. And it's like, shut up.
Oh man,
I don't need another Navi partner. Like, Nintendo, you cut this stuff. You stopped doing that, and then you brought it back.
It reminds me of Navi, and then also Fi, which was like the really big offender in the Zelda. And I like Fi, the character, and what she represented. Yeah. I mean, and the ending was like so tear-jerking. But like, she's like, there's an 85% chance I'm going to annoy you in the next 10 minutes. And like, it's just so crazy how often she did that. And that's kind of what Olivia feels like, because it's the most obvious stuff. Like, you achieve the very simple task ahead of you of like breaking a block to open a path or whatever it is. Like, so obvious. And then she pops out to be like, looks like there's a new path to walk down, Mario. And it's like, I know.
God, that is not legit, hands down, my biggest issue with the game so far. It's the hand holding is so bad.
I heard you mention that on because I watched about half of your guys' podcast from last weekend, and I heard you saying that, and then Andres, I heard you constantly saying like how it's a good adventure, just not a good RPG game. And in the 5 or 6 hours I totally agree. As an adventure game, it's been great so far.
Yeah, it's a great adventure game. It's just not an RPG, and I feel like sometimes it tries to pretend it is, and it fails.
Mm-hmm.
It just needs to move. Like, if you're gonna do the adventure game, sure, great, it's an awesome adventure game. Just move completely into that realm. Don't try to like be in this weird in between.
Yeah,
it's actually interesting you mentioned the in between, because I also kind of feel that way about the, I guess, difficulty of the game. Like, I'm okay with games having, like, being appealing to different audiences. Like, there's ways to do that. If you look at Breath of the Wild, the way that it's structured, you can play that game to where it's really challenging, or it's not, I don't want to say easy, but a casual gamer can get through it depending on how you play that game. Same thing for Mario Odyssey. Like, the base moons are very easy to get, but if you really want to get to the extra levels, those extra levels require a great deal more challenge. And there's ways to do that. With Paper Mario, I know in the interviews they suggested they want to do something along those lines, but I feel like it's a little, I don't want to like sound too harsh on the game, because overall I'm really liking the game, but I do feel like you have these hand-holdy like explanations, but then also sometimes you get stuck into a fight and the puzzle is like definitely not meant for someone in like the beginning parts of grade school. Like, it is, it's hard. Yeah.
I've been
stumped several times.
Yeah, it's very, it can stump you. I totally agree. I was playing earlier today, and I was playing on the stupid the colored pencil boss, from the treehouse.
Yeah.
I got to that. So I'm really early in the game, and I was like, this is kind of annoying me and I was like, am I stupid? Am I too stupid to play this game and line these? I was really overthinking the arrows thing, and I got it. Like, it's not like it was so hard I couldn't beat it. But I was getting stumped, like you were saying, and it's
Yeah.
like, is this my fault or is the game actually hard? I can't
Yeah,
tell.
I feel like they over-explain the basic battle system and then just like don't even barely explain it all the boss battle mechanics.
So it's
The
just
only reason I
inconsistent.
really knew what to do was because I had watched, I think Nintendo, I forget. Oh, the Treehouse, that's what it was. The Treehouse,
yeah.
they showed off the color pencil boss, so I already knew pretty much how to beat him. But the I beat the rubber band boss. I actually died. I had to use a revive during that boss.
Wow.
Like the bosses, they can get tricky. Like some of the times they'll do like 40 damage in a single hit, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
And you can't
Yeah.
heal just any time. You have to stop on those action things and then use up an action to heal.
Yeah.
So the bosses can be tricky. You
Mhm.
need to do them well, or otherwise you're going to run out of health.
I'm still
and
glad there
lose
was at least that much challenge though, because after the treehouse, and I talked about it on my breakdown of it too, I was worried it was going to be too easy, because they didn't really show any of the enemies attacking back, and I was like, is this whole battle
Right.
system built around Mario just devastating, and the bad guys just sit there to take the damage like a sponge?
The normal
but
battle
that's
system
not the
kinda
case.
is.
Yeah, except for that, yeah. So, but I'm glad that little bit of challenge has popped in for sure. So,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how, for me, because I was like, maybe I should get Ghost of Tsushima instead of Paper Mario. Like, I did debate it, but because I focus on Nintendo, it's just like, well, I can talk about this game. So there was like that element that made it an easier choice for me. And I don't regret getting Paper Mario because I am enjoying the game a lot. But there was like, oh, maybe Ghost of Tsushima also seems like right up my alley, and eventually I am going to pick up that game, and I imagine I'm going to have a really good time. And when I sort of think about it, Ghost of Tsushima is a really good game, but then only like a few weeks ago we also got The Last of Us 2, and then if we go like a month or so before that, it was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like all of these games on PlayStation, like if I was a Sony
PlayStation has
fanboy,
been doing good this year.
right? It's been very strong. And when
They
I
got
compare
Spider-Man
that,
coming in the holidays too.
yeah, they're strong right now. I'm using this as segue, but like
Nice.
it's so strong. But you kind of look at what Nintendo's doing, and it's not that. Like there's definitely like a disparity in terms of quality of games that have been coming out this year compared to Sony's first party games and Nintendo's. And we still don't know about anything, which is it's actually like a little frustrating. Like, but I'm a hardcore fan. Like I bet like casual players that just don't pay attention to the news, they probably think things are fine. But for people who like actually pay attention, who watch the directs and things of that nature, I feel like in general Nintendo fans are starting to get a little restless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other companies have had big presentations. I mean, just last week had that big Microsoft presentation, and there's a lot of controversy around it. But personally, as an Xbox fan and as a Halo fan, I'm super happy, and I'm looking forward to the end of this year because I'm gonna go play Halo Infinite, and I'm gonna be able to play Spider-Man, on my next gen systems. And on Nintendo, I have no idea what I'm gonna be playing. If anything, is there gonna be something? I mean, obviously they're. Like, you think it'd be obvious that there should be something, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just, the industry's in a weird place because of COVID and because of next-gen consoles coming, which does give Sony and Microsoft momentum that Nintendo doesn't have, and they wouldn't have even if it wasn't a COVID year, right? Unless there was a Switch Pro, but we can't really get too much into that.
Right.
And so with all those things, I just feel like Nintendo is in an extra weird place. Like the industry is already in a weird place by default. Then you've got Nintendo in a weird place on top of that because they seem to be, I've talked about it so many times on my videos too. They seem to be the one company that's really sort of taking a back seat and allowing the situation right now to really affect their business. And the biggest frustration, and I don't know if you guys watch my videos or anyone else does, because you've heard me say it 1,000 times if you do. The big problem for me that I've been chanting all year is just Nintendo's lack of messaging about it. Just the fact that they haven't addressed any of the fans, any of the community. And I just said a couple days ago too how they've been okay to address their investors in a couple of meetings to the people who are giving them money, but to the other people giving them money, which is us, the fans and the consumer, they're kind of like just let them squirm. And it's like, bro,
they do those little like COVID like warning things before the directs and stuff, or the disclaimers. But I mean, it's not really specific
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andres.
No, I just 100% agree with you guys entirely. It's just if they had just said, guys, look, this is third-party stuff, and they told us that, right? Like when we got the announcement, they told us that, but they didn't say, hey, but don't worry, our announcements for our first-party content is on the way. They never told us that, and had they said that,
right.
I think people would have appreciated this for what it is. But now,
well, I mean, when Microsoft had their third party, they had a big third party event, but they were like, okay, guys, in July, we're going to have our big first party event. So we're going to show Halo. Don't worry. Yeah. And fans were okay with that. They were like, okay, we got a pretty awesome showcase with some really awesome third party games. And in 2 months, we're going to get another really awesome showcase with first party game.
But see, exactly.
But Nintendo, we're just left in the dark. We have no idea what's going on.
Right. And now some fans are concerned or even thinking, is this showcase what we've been waiting for? Like, is this meant to hold us over until the next? No. But that's what some people believe. I don't agree with that, but that's what some people believe. And I think that's part of, like, the restlessness, and I guess I don't want to call everyone toxic, but there is some toxicity in the conversations relating to this on the internet right now. It's not the prettiest of scenes when it comes to talking about this.
It's kind of the cycle too, right? Because whenever, especially in the Nintendo community, but in gaming in general, but even if you're a Nintendo fan and you follow their news and their directs and their release schedules, this kind of is the cycle where every couple of months or once a year, like last year was the Pokemon thing, right? Yeah. Where something happens around Nintendo or one of their franchises or some decision. Excuse me. The year before, it would have been the online thing.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat.
Oh.
The year before, it would have been the online thing. And that's the cycle, is something comes out and people just get really angry about it. And I do have to say, though, a lot of times there are reasonable people, too. I think there are actually more reasonable people around this current thing than there is around some of the past ones. But there is definitely, like you were saying. Yeah, it seems like because of COVID, people are still more willing to give a little bit of slack.
Yeah, their reasoning, it's hard to fault them here. Like Pokemon, fans will go all day talking about how they should hire more staff and give the bigger budget and, more time to work on games and stuff.
But
which are all arguments that you can kind of like see, and they can't just be instantly shot down. COVID, you complain about that, you look like a jerk. You look like a horrible person.
You look really silly if you do.
Yeah.
And that's so we are still, and to Andres, to your point too, like there definitely is some toxic people and some really like mean swear-filled arguments out there, and people who just can't see anything but their own little tunnel vision of what they want. But it still just falls into the cycle. Like something around Nintendo happens every year that just gets people up in arms. This is one of the first times in a long time where, for me, for the first 5 or 6 months of the year, I was giving them all the slack and runway they needed to be like, it's a weird year, like everything's getting delayed, there's a pandemic, especially when the pandemic was like brand spanking new. Of course,
we didn't know how any of the companies were going to react.
What I've noticed, Rob, is that you've been pretty consistent throughout the year of saying, hey, look, I'm okay with, Nintendo not having that much to show off, but just be transparent with us. And I think that's the problem. Totally. You are on the money that they just haven't really been entirely clear of what's been going on.
Yeah. I mean, you have to wonder, and I'll ask what you guys think, because I've posed this in my videos. If they only gave us, Animal Crossing, Paper Mario, and the Clubhouse games, right? And Xenoblade, like those are 4 Switch Nintendo releases. If that's all they gave us between, January 1st and December 31st, 2020, and it sucks and we're sad and we got all these bad directs, but if they said, hey, our business is struggling, we can't do it, we need the time, Nintendo will be back in 2021, or whatever that would be, do you think that would make you guys feel better? And do you think people would also react better if they just came out and said something like that? What do you guys think?
So it would be bad, because that's bad.
Okay.
Right.
But I mean, it's bad because it's sad.
It would be better than if they just didn't release anything and just were like, oh, guys, isn't this an amazing year? Like they are now. Like they're acting like this is just been an awesome year for them.
I think. Yeah.
Like their marketing has all been like upbeat, just uptone, typical Nintendo marketing, which is great when they're on top, but it's not okay when you're just not saying anything or releasing anything.
They would at least set an expectation, and people
it's
wouldn't
not the Wii U era.
Right. They would be avoiding less disappointment. And I think fans wouldn't feel like Nintendo... Like, some fans almost feel slighted right now by Nintendo because they're not telling us what's going on. At least then, even though it would be bad, there wouldn't be this expectation of, oh, well, maybe there is still some good stuff to come this year. If they were just to tell us straight up, hey, no, then we would have that expectation, and it wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah. How many of us are just relying on just the possible glint of hope that these Mario remasters are real? And they're not even new games, but we still want them so badly anyway. And I think that's the result of what you're talking about, Andres. Like, until they come out and say something, either tell us they have nothing else, or just give us an awesome regular direct, like one or the other. All we can do is just wonder and hope. And so we're all pretty reasonable here, right? But there are the more unreasonable people are the ones out there that are so laser focused on every day they don't say something is another day that they think they're going to get Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 and a new Pikmin all in the same day in 2020. And then they're just going to be disappointed because that's clearly not Nintendo's plan right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, even if they don't have a great lineup this year, even if it's just like Mario remasters and like Pikmin 3 or something like that, like, or maybe one more game. I don't even care. Like, just tell me what it is. Like, if it's really, really bad, just be like, hey guys, we're ramping up for some great games in 2021. Maybe if they know, like, if Breath of the Wild was supposed to come out this year, the sequel one is gonna come out next year instead, they would know that by now. Tell us that. Tell us Breath of the Wild, give us a new trailer and be like, Breath of the Wild sequel 2021. Wait, don't do nothing.
On that note, I want to ask you guys something, and I'm just curious what you guys take on this, because I've already accepted that I am in the large minority. Like, no, I'm in the minority here in thinking that there's still a chance Breath of the Wild 2 could come out this year. I get that.
Bold claim.
I know, but I think a lot of people point to the fact that there hasn't been any marketing for it to suggest that means it's not coming out this year. I don't necessarily agree with that thinking, because that would also suggest that because we haven't gotten any marketing for anything else for this year, would that also mean that there's nothing coming for this year? And I just don't think that's the case. Like, I think Nintendo is just advertising things differently this year. I think when they announce something, it's going to be coming out not that long from the announcement. I think that's just how they're treating things this year, so there could still be some good stuff. Maybe not as big as Breath of the Wild 2, but I just don't necessarily agree with the thinking that because there hasn't been any marketing yet, there isn't anything on the horizon.
I think for sure you're onto something with everything but Zelda. Because I think any other game, even like a surprise Mario collection or a surprise Pikmin 3 or even a Pikmin 4, even a new Pikmin, those kinds of games, I think you're right. They could get away with the Paper Mario route where they're like, we just need 2 months lead time and tweet it out. There you go. Here's your new game. But Zelda, Breath of the Wild, man, I love your optimism and I want it so bad. We all want it. But I just think that to release a new main Zelda game, I think Nintendo wants the big hype cycle. Especially because right now, and that's not to say that you can't be right in a year where Nintendo's more impossible to predict than others, to be fair. So I won't say it's 100% not going to happen, but I just feel it's not likely because they need that hype cycle. They need that time. Look at how long they previewed Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild. I mean, they take their times with Zelda. Breath of the Wild was unique, but still, they just gave us so much with that game. And at this point, if they were going to release Zelda this year, then it's guaranteed to be a big holiday title, and a title that they want to probably help keep Nintendo in the conversation against a PS5 and an Xbox Series X, which is even harder than a normal holiday. And I just feel like they would want a good year lead time to say, here's the title, and then here's, a couple of update trailers and gameplay demos over the course of like 12 months. I feel like they would want that with Zelda. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I don't know if they need it to be that long. I know when they announced the name for Breath of the Wild, their initial plans were for it to be a holiday 2016 game, but the Switch itself got delayed. The NX at the time got delayed to 2017, so it delayed the game as well. I mean, that was going to be like a 6-month window there for its because we hadn't seen anything of it other than the initial trailer and the Game Awards footage at that point. I think right now they're getting to the point where it's getting close to that point where they can't just, announce it. I think they need to, if they're going to announce it and have time to market it, it needs to be soon. Like if it's like 2 months from now, that's maybe a bit too. You're kind of a bit too close.
This is my counter argument.
Next month.
This is my counter argument.
The latest.
When we got the NX reveal, that was the October of October 2016. So they revealed the concept to us October 2016, and then the system had a massive blowout that January, and it came out that March. And that was for an entire system. So I think it is conceivable that we could at least get a big game, if it's not Breath of the Wild 2, something comparable to it this year. But I totally understand being skeptical, because I mean, look, I'll be real with you. Even though I think it technically still makes sense, I also fully understand that 2021 seems like more realistic at this point. Like, I get that, and I would even say that if I had to bet money, I might not bet money that it's coming out this year. But I just
you want to believe.
I want to believe, and I think it's possible.
I think it's possible. I think
I'll tell you, that's actually a pretty good argument. I think that's a pretty good argument you make. It's a really good point about the NX to Switch reveal. I mean, it really was 6 months. Basically, it was completely 6 months for them to say, "Hey, here's a new console officially," because the whole 2 years of NX rumors was like not really official, like Nintendo talking to people about anything, or even really acknowledging it beyond just like the NX code name. And I was in the Nintendo YouTube community throughout that whole NX time. You could go back and watch videos of me. Man, it was great. I actually kind of have good memories of it. Yeah, it was actually a lot of fun.
That was when I was first starting my channel. So it was, it was a very interesting time for me to start.
It was a weird time.
I was on
especially being a YouTuber.
I was on team not a handheld. I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense.
I was on team handheld. I actually was doing all kinds of videos talking about the NVIDIA specs and the Shield and its technology and what it could do in a handheld and stuff.
It was a wacky time, man. And at the end of the day, it was Eurogamer. Eurogamer was the ones that actually nailed it. They were the ones that had that little little patent drawing of like a little screen with controllers, and it was like, no way would that ever. No one believed it. I didn't believe it.
Yeah,
and that's what
I believed it when they showed off the Switch. I was not surprised that in the slightest. I was like, oh, that's what it's gonna look like. That's how this function that they talked about worked. That was always my perspective. I didn't even realize that a lot of people were just like writing it off. I know there was like people like, I think the Dreamcast guy who was saying it was going to be a really powerful system.
A lot of us.
There was no evidence for it all.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that
I always thought the evidence there, all the actually like good leaks were pointing to them, what the Switch is. So
yeah.
I think that kind of speaks to how impressive the Switch is, though, because at the time, the idea of a portable system being able to pull off a home console experience, like a true one and not like a gimped one, just didn't seem reasonable. But that's why the Switch is so special, because it does pull it off. And I think that initial trailer does such a great job, because the first thing they show you is the most advanced Nintendo game we've gotten in years, which is Breath of the Wild, on a portable system. So I thought that was just special. And I mean, going back to what we were talking about, though, like, I think it's possible that Nintendo can still have a major blowout and really impress us. It doesn't have to be Zelda, okay? But
my other thinking is just we haven't seen their we haven't seen their first party presentation, is what I'm saying. Like, if this was a typical, non-COVID year, like June, there would have been an E3, we would have seen first party plans. Like, we haven't seen a direct like that. So we don't know any of their first party plans yet.
That's the kind of stuff that still makes me wonder if they have it. That's the whole conversation. Like, if they're giving up on 2020, like we all worry, then there wouldn't be first party games. There wouldn't be a Nintendo Direct to focus on first party games. things like a Pikmin, a Mario, F-Zero, Zelda, whatever it could be. There just wouldn't be that. And and thinking about that takes me back to the partner presentation that we just got on Monday. And I've talked about it a couple times about the decision to do that. There's something weird, extra special weird about that thing that I just don't know if a lot of us have been focusing on, because they called it a Nintendo Direct Mini partner presentation, whatever. We've had Direct Minis before. We had a Direct Mini earlier in the year in March, which was actually a pretty darn good mini. But why did they choose now, 7 months into 2020, 7 months into a pandemic, and everything's weird and Nintendo's been silent, and they're not stupid. They know that we're talking about and wondering what they're doing. And the way they chose to give us a Direct wasn't even, not only was it not a Direct, it wasn't even a normal Direct Mini. It was a weirder, smaller, more truncated, super funky little 8-minute thing. It was the weirdest thing we've seen Nintendo do.
Felt more like an indie
would they decide to do that? It did. It really did. I mean,
honestly, I've watched more entertaining indie showcase than that. The last indie showcase, they showed off some really good games. This presentation was just.
I just want to point out for the SMT fans, I think that's that is a big reveal. It's a big reveal. Yeah. We've been waiting for that, and I'm definitely have my eyes peeled for it. But overall, that presentation did nothing to fill up the coming months, because that's all 2021 stuff. There was nothing
they're not
to
even
fill
really
up
good games.
Yeah,
other than Shin Megami Tensei. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. And to tell you the truth, my secret theory I've been having about that thing is, as far as the why, is honestly because of Shin Megami Tensei. And I seriously wonder if they were like, we're going to finally reveal that Shin Megami Tensei 5 is coming and there's a remake of another game. And in any other situation, in lieu of this 8-minute Direct, they could have just put those trailers out, right? Like any other trailer, and let that be the news. But I think they wanted it to have like a fake version of hype, of build-up hype, of we're watching a Direct, we're getting information. Are they going to give us a one more thing? And they did. The one more thing of this 8-minute show was Shin Megami Tensei 5. And I think that they wanted, instead of just putting it out there, they're like, let's talk about these two Shin Megami Tensei games, but just tack on 3 trailers ahead of it, just to kind of create fake Nintendo Direct hype. That's kind of what I think. Because there's no reason to have packaged those 5 trailers the way they did.
No,
the package does not make sense.
They completely blew up in their faces. I think they should have realized that Nintendo fans, just hearing the word Direct, no matter what context, no matter how much, because they totally downplayed this thing as not even a big deal. They were just constantly guys, okay, it's only third-party stuff. It's only stuff mostly stuff, we already know about. And it was going to be a few games. They were really downplaying this thing. But people thought it was going to be amazing anyways. I thought there was going to be at least something interesting.
We thought maybe No More Heroes 3 or Bravely Default 2, and that was just no.
Yeah.
Nope.
They have third-party games that are supposedly coming out this year, and they didn't show them.
That's the thing. These are the things that when you add it up in your head and then you look at the final result, that's why it doesn't make sense. And that's why it's even weirder. I mean,
so many red flags.
You're right. That's a perfect way to say it, man. Red flags. There's definitely a lot of red flags. And so it just comes down to, I think that if I really think there's a more than good chance that Nintendo really doesn't have a plan to release any other major games in this year. Maybe 1 or 2 mid-tier something or others, but nothing major.
I'll give you that. It could be a 2019 sort of thing. Because to me, 2019 was basically a whole bunch of. It was a good year, but it wasn't a great year because there wasn't any.
Okay.
All mid-tier games. I would qualify Luigi's Mansion as a mid-tier game, Three Houses as a mid-tier game.
Yeah,
really good games.
Pokemon, you know.
Yes, and Pokemon is a big deal for me. I'm a huge Pokemon fan, but it's no Metroid Prime 4. It's no Super Mario Odyssey. It's no Breath of the Wild.
Fire Emblem came out that year though too, which was a pretty big one.
So for me, Fire Emblem is really good. I played it, put 100 hours into the game, love it, but
nice.
I wouldn't qualify it as the tier of the Mario Zelda Prime tier. I would.
I mean, it's not the S tier. That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
It's A tier.
It's definitely an A tier though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I don't even like Pokemon, and I think Pokemon is easily an A or an S or what. I mean, by sales, it's an S.
Well, sales wise, it's SS plus. But
It is.
Yeah, pretty much.
Their
yeah.
ambition is B tier at best.
Which one is?
Pokemon.
Oh, based on the game
yeah.
style or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. Pokemon's weird to me, but oh man, I don't remember the point I was making, but it was just I know what it was. So if we go on the line of thinking that there's more than a good chance that Nintendo doesn't have anything major for the rest of the year, that's where I fall back on my theory of that's when it makes sense to tell us, It's like I can't stop harping on that enough. Like, I just wish Nintendo would talk about it. Like, I mean, and if anything, they could have used this last Direct to have a little bit of some sort of presentation or message or discussion. I mean, if Nintendo was willing to put Takahashi on screen to tell everyone about Metroid Prime, like, they've never done anything like that. And they were willing to be like, hey, y'all, this is what's happening. Like, person to person. It wasn't even like a screen of text. It was somebody who represents the company talking to us. And honestly, if you look at people's reactions to that, it was heartbreak across the board, but there was very little anger. I think actually the community reacted really well to it because I think people were willing to acknowledge, do what you need to do to make the best game possible, and at least you told us.
I mean, they did that for Breath of the Wild as well when they delayed that.
They did
initially.
Yes,
and everybody took it well. I mean, I was heartbroken and my life was over at that point until the game came out. But
I can relate,
but I was still I was like, oh well, at least you explained, and the game came out, and it was great.
Yeah. So I just think that Nintendo, they either need to, and I hesitate to use the word need. We keep doing that, but like they should either communicate the message or they should finally give us something. Like, if the reason there isn't telling us that they're dropping out of 2020 is because they have stuff to show, then it's like, bro, show it. Like, we're well beyond the time where you could have put, you didn't have to do an 8-minute direct with like a couple not exciting trailers. Right. You could have made a 20-minute show and put No More Heroes and Bayonetta and Breath of the Wild in there. If those things are there and they're telling us 2020 is on track, then that was a great time to do it.
If they don't have anything, the only reason I can see why they're not telling us is they just want to keep as much relevancy in as possible. They want people talking about Nintendo as much as possible. Because even if at the end of the day it comes out as disappointment, at least people were looking at Nintendo throughout the whole year instead of being like, oh, Nintendo has nothing, and just instantly just like, okay, accept that fact and move on.
Yeah.
That's great for us, but for them, that is paramount to, like, suicide.
So, couple things. We got super chats from Larry V. He put in a super chat for each of us, so thank you very much, Larry V.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Wow, right on. Thanks. Yeah. I think I know Larry. He's a regular on my channel, I think. Yeah. So
cool dude.
Sweet.
Yeah. So, I'm debating reading the Q&A from the investors meeting because there was a lot of confusion about what Shuntaro Furukawa said in relation to their software production and plans this year. Like, at first we got this thing that were saying, oh, don't worry. Well, not don't worry, but it was something along the lines of, our software plans for this year have not been delayed. But then we got, like, I don't want to say an update, but it was provided with more context. And when we saw with more context, it then was like, oh, well, maybe there could be still some delays. Like, either way, it was always left open for potential delays, but at the time, when it was said, it was suggesting that there's still going to be games. So,
yeah.
It's a long thing, so I feel like I don't really, unless you guys want me to read it, it's a...
You can read it, that's fine.
It's fine. It's a paragraph, I'll read it real quick.
You can do it.
It's all good.
Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. There we go. Alright, so I'll read the question too. Why not? Alright. So I'd like to hear more about the assumptions underlying the financial forecast for the current fiscal year ending in March 2021. Earlier you discussed some of the risk of the impact of COVID-19 is prolonged or worsens further, but what improvements to the manufacturing situation do you anticipate as underlying assumption of your hardware sales forecast? And with regard to software sales forecast, to what extent are you taking into account the risk of major titles slated for fiscal year being delayed? Finally, digital sales grew significant. That's the part that matters, the software part. That was the question, will that be impacted? So this is what Furukawa responded with related to that whole question. During the previous fiscal year, when manufacturing in China was temporarily suspended in February due to COVID-19, it caused a delay of shipments of Nintendo Switch hardware intended for sale in Japan. The effect on our overall business performance, however, was minor. Although manufacturing has been gradually recovering since March, the impact of COVID-19 spread globally in the second half of March and in April, which made it impossible to procure sufficient quantities of some components. As a result, we are not in a position to be able to produce the full quantity of units we actually want to produce. That said, there are signs of gradual improvement, and so we anticipate the impact of COVID-19 on production will subside to some degree by summer, and that the volume we will be able to produce throughout the year will align with our sales forecast units for the fiscal year. Just to stop right there. So basically what they said as of the most recent Q&A, once the year is done, they plan to be back on schedule. So just to kind of put context to what I'm saying right now, or reading. But if the impact is prolonged or worsens further and parts procurement and manufacturing are affected again, then there's a possibility they will be able to produce quantities needed to fulfill our current sales forecast. With regard to software, this is the part we really want to focus on here.
Yeah.
We have more titles planned for release in this fiscal year beyond the ones we have already announced, and we have accounted for those in the financial forecast. However, many employees of Nintendo and our partner companies are currently working from home, and the differences in development environments between home and office may make it difficult to release titles as currently planned, should the impact be prolonged. At this point, we are presenting our financial forecast on the assumption that titles can be released as planned. So, what I think is really great about that is that it clarifies the holes that we got beforehand when we just saw like a piece of it without all the context. That, when they're saying that software plans are still, in terms of their financial forecast, that includes things unannounced. Like, that wasn't clear beforehand. So, that's good news. But at the same time, they also made sure to note that right now they're working from home, and if that continues, if things don't start to subside, that could still lead to delays. But they're still overall forecasting that they will have unannounced games to come out this year that will meet their forecast for this year.
Well, specifically, they do mention it's the fiscal year, so technically that ends sometime in
that
March.
goes into March, right?
So I wouldn't be too surprised if maybe their internal plans are shifting some games a few months. So technically, it's not delayed outside the fiscal year, but Breath of the Wild, instead of coming out November 2020, now it's coming out, March 2021.
Yeah, it's definitely forecasting a best case scenario, which isn't necessarily the worst thing, and it's probably smart business, I assume. We're not business people, so
it's definitely better to tell your investors that everything seems to be okay right now, and then also subtly be like, oh, but if it isn't okay, it's not our fault.
I mean, I think we can maybe assume that that's the right thing to do, but as people who aren't in that line of business, the fear I have is if you forecast the best case scenario because it sounds good to your investors in the moment, how much damage is done if you don't meet that best case scenario? That's one of the reasons why in the second year of the Wii U, they drastically reduced what they forecasted to sell, because that makes their sheets look better, and it's better for their investors to exceed what you forecast than to not meet what you forecast. So I do think you're right. Like, the investors want to hear the best case. So in that situation, and the point I'm trying to make is, I guess, I don't know, because I just don't work in that line of business. So I'm just wondering.
We don't have enough information here. We don't work in that line of business. We don't actually know how much Nintendo's plans may or may not be delayed. So it's really
I do
hard
have to say. I like Andres the way you said how that fills in the holes from the original statement, because it definitely does do that. But it also has like a non-committal aspect to it that's totally still kind of frustrating.
There's such a disclaimer. Like, the entire COVID thing is just hey, if it doesn't work out, don't blame us kind of feel.
It is the right kind of message, though, if you think about it. Like, I really wish that they would make a public statement that echoes those same sentiments, but says it in a more PR-friendly manner.
Right.
However you would... I mean, think of how what I envision them doing with that is like the same kinds of things we've seen from CD Projekt Red about Cyberpunk, and Sony about The Last of Us, and Square about Final Fantasy, how they release these, just wall of text images that's like 3 paragraphs explaining, hey, we're excited about what we're doing. We know you're going to love this game. It's shaping up really well, but it's going to take longer. The pandemic is affecting us, blah, 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 blah. To just say to the people, us who would see it, this is what's going on, so you know. And if they were to spin the same quotes that Andres, you just read from Furukawa there, in a message like that on Twitter, I think it would go a long way to just helping everyone understand, and for putting Nintendo in a better position. I think the downside that they maybe are trying to avoid, and I just theorized this on a video recently too, is that maybe the concern is right now they're selling Switches like crazy, even though they don't have games. And so maybe they're worried that if they tell people there won't be games for the rest of the year, that suddenly those Switch sales will die.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Maybe
before.
that's
like,
the worry.
They want to keep Nintendo as relevant as possible because the moment they say, "Oh well, 2020 is gonna suck," nobody's gonna buy a Switch.
So,
well, I mean, people still will, but
Could
it's gonna hurt sales.
Yeah.
But yeah, to that point you guys are making, I read through that whole Q&A. There's a lot there, so we're not gonna get away from it from this podcast here, but just another part I read that I found interesting. Like, I was reading it hoping to find proof to suggest that, hey, things are gonna be fine, but what I found was actually the opposite, even though I'd rather have not read it that way. But basically, there was a lot of discussion on how, yes, there are still software plans of unannounced games, like that is still a thing, but they were also wanted to highlight how they wanted to focus on their evergreen titles now and to focus on pushing that, because there's already a lot of good games on Switch. They are continually selling really well, so to the point you guys
they've even been bringing back Splatfest just to have
and we just got the Pokken tournament event,
and ARMS,
right?
Pokken.
They're just doing things to keep that all rolling.
And there's also you guys can correct me with the release timing, but isn't there still the 2 Pokemon DLCs still to release? Is that
one of them's out already,
left.
but the bigger one is still coming later this year, towards the holidays.
Okay, yeah, because they still keep promoting that and stuff on Twitter. So I'm like, well, that's probably something that they're relying on, and it'll make them a lot of money. I know, people aren't happy with that game, but I also, it's sold like crazy, so I think people are going to buy that DLC.
Yeah.
I
think
the
DLC
best selling Pokemon
definitely
game of all time. Some people like it.
Yeah.
There you go.
DLC definitely has the best.
Put that on the box.
Yeah, some people like this.
Pokemon Sword and Shield. Some people like this.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I don't know. I don't even know. It's just so kind of, it's frustrating in a different kind of way, because it's not the same kind of thing where like a company messes up so badly and so purposefully that you just want to like strangle them, It's not that kind of frustration. It's definitely a frustration born out of circumstance. And that's the frustrating thing about being frustrated. You can put that inception together about the whole thing. Is it's like so many of us, like the three of us talking, and I know a lot of people who would watch this probably understand and want to understand. And like we all know, the skeleton in Nintendo's closet is they're just not able to do things like they want to. But without us knowing, and without us also getting games, and with cryptic statements like, well, that one's less cryptic, but like when the first cryptic statement came out, it just adds up to just more confusion. And so it's like we're frustrated, nothing's happening, and we're not being told anything, but we also kind of understand it. And so it's just messy.
So I do think if they don't have anything, or if this year is going to be like really bad, this is not what they need to have said, in my opinion. Well, to their investors maybe, but for us, like, they just kind of told us that everything's mostly fine. Whereas if in reality they already know that 2020 is going to be like pretty bad, then that's just a straight up lie, pretty much. I think there's I think they're kind of using the ambiguity to their advantage, where we don't know what their plans were. So if they change them, we can't say that they lied because we don't have any proof.
Thickens.
Right? I mean, like, they can release games anytime they want and be like, yep, that's exactly when we meant it, and we can't say anything.
Yeah, and also games can't get delayed if there's never an announced release date. Like,
right?
True.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Very good points. But at least they did at least part of the statement is that they have games they haven't told us about, right? Like, if we focus on that and try to be a little bit more positive and optimistic with how we view it, he did say there are games we have for this year that we haven't told you about. Like, he says that point blank. And so what if we keep talking about, but if that's not true, why don't you just tell us? But like, what if it's true? Because if it's true,
it is. I think it is true. I know, kind of want to like.
I want to.
100% it's true, but it's like the wording is so ambiguous. It's so ambiguous. Is that the word? I think it's the word. Yeah. That it's just they could announce anything and that would fit the bill. Like they could announce one game and be like, "Oh, what do you mean?
Yeah.
We said we had other games. We announced the remasters. That's like 3 games in one, bro. What do you mean?
So I want to point out how like there have been times in the past where we've been starved for directs. Has it been as bad? No. But
No.
like remember the whole Chibi Robo craze, and that was just for a direct mini. And then later that year we got, I think that was 2018, right? And then later that year, like not too long ago, we had a major March Nintendo Direct. They announced Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and that was huge. Right. And it was great. And then let's go back to even last year. The first half of 2019 seemed kind of slow. But then that March Nintendo Direct came around, they announced some games, and before we knew it, we were like, whoa, there's all these different games that are coming up for the Switch this year. And E3 2019, E3 2019 was the best Direct maybe ever.
It was so good.
So the argument I'm trying to make here is that right now, things are bad. They seem, or rather, they seem bad. We're talking about it, we're hungry. But I think if it could be next, it could be this week, it could be next week, it could be a month from now. Yeah. All Nintendo has to do, drop that Direct, announce some games, and everything is fine again. And I'll even add, while I like what I saw from the Halo games, from you, Freudian slip there, all I care about is Halo, but from what Microsoft's presentation, from what I've seen from PlayStation, I gotta tell you that while I'm somewhat interested, when it comes to PS5, for me, I'm not that into the Spider-Man series, even though I think it's great, it's just not something I'm personally into. The one game that I'm really excited about for PS5 is a multi-platform game, that's Demon's Souls. So I don't really feel like I need to get a PS5 immediately. And then for Series X, the other game is Halo Infinite. All the other games are like kind of far off, or like I meant to Fable, but that's far off.
That's probably a couple years away.
So Fable for sure.
Right. Yeah. Be quiet, Siri. Anyway, it's still talking to me. Anyway,
is that actual Siri? Is that Siri? You said
that is Siri.
Siri, what is the square root of 700 trillion thousand?
Well, I have earphones in, so
she can't hear you. Oh yeah,
yeah.
Because I could hear her talking, so it's like maybe she could hear us.
Yeah. For a second, I expected something to happen. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
But getting back to my point. Halo is like that one big game that's coming out from Xbox, and my point is that both Sony and Microsoft, they showed off some good stuff, but it's in my opinion, it's nothing that completely overpowers what Nintendo can do. If Nintendo puts out a Direct that doesn't even have to be like E3 2019, if it's just like a solid Direct, like a middle of the road Direct, they will be fine in terms of Nintendo fans, I think, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I even was talking recently about how I still want to believe that there's a plan, right? And I do tend to believe that they have a plan, simply because the partner presentation was as weird as we discussed here today. Like, it was just so bafflingly weird. It's like, to me, it only could have been that weird because there must be another plan around it. It's a hopeful perspective, but I do want to believe that.
They did say there were going to be more partner showcases throughout the year, so I'm
that's
sure...
True.
Like, as disappointing as that was, maybe the next one will have No More Heroes 3 or Brave the Default 2 or something.
What if we just get 3 more ones that are just as disappointing? And so it's like, we got 4 really disappointing.
Oh God.
But I was gonna say, Andres, I think that you're dead on. And I think that I've been maybe feeling something similar, but I hadn't really figured out how to voice it. But I think it's as simple as one kick-ass Direct really solves the majority of their problems, right?
It does.
I mean, and it can be, like you said, it doesn't even have to be amazing. It can be 20 minutes. And if they give us a trailer and a date for No More Heroes, and a trailer and a date for Bayonetta and for Bravely Default, that's 3 third-party games right there that people care about. Maybe one surprise Nintendo game, a middle-tier game like a Pikmin 4 or something like that. And then the other smattering of 5 or 6, like, here's an update on Hollow Knight, here's Axiom Verge 2, which I was talking about recently, stuff like that. And that's like suddenly a pretty good Direct. It's like, whoa, we know about 3 great-looking third-party games we all want, hopefully coming out in 2020, and we get the Mario games, and we got a Pikmin, and like that is the Band-Aid I think that a lot of people would be looking for. And this whole conversation we've been talking about for months would be almost completely moot. I mean, there's still some things, but I think it would really help a lot,
I think the hardcore Nintendo fan would be satisfied enough to like give Nintendo like a passing grade, and not be like outraged. I think more casual people or people who play on multiple platforms like me, I plan on buying a PlayStation 5 day one. I probably buy Series X day one. You know, I'm gonna be playing these consoles when it comes, you know, November, December, whenever they release. So Nintendo needs to show me, you know, Nintendo is my favorite, but at the end of the day, if they come out with like the Mario remasters and some third-party stuff, I'm gonna be playing Halo Infinite on my Series X. Like, that's just what's gonna be happening. I'm gonna be playing Spider-Man on my PS5.
Sure.
So I think, you know, for the hardcore Nintendo fan who only really plays Nintendo, yes, I think they can get away with that. For everybody else, I think it's gonna be a little bit of like, oh, there's not really anything great.
And
you know, there's not that AAA game, that holiday game.
I want to point out that because Rob, you had also mentioned that like maybe Nintendo could give up on this year. I know you're not saying that they will, but it's like maybe a possibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think Nintendo wants to do that because if you look at their software sales, they are incredible. Animal Crossing is doing so well right now, and just look at what Sony's doing with their games. They're doing so well right now. This is like the ultimate time to come out with a game. So,
yes,
I think even though Breath of the Wild 2 seems increasingly less likely, if somehow they have a surprise announcement for it or some other major game, but I just want to focus on Breath of the Wild 2 because it's a sequel, it has even maybe the opportunity to surpass Breath of the Wild 1 simply because of the climate it would come out in. And it doesn't even have to be November. I think this thing is going to go on for a while. Maybe it's a part of their fiscal year 2020 game, and so that would be like for March, which would be a 4-year anniversary, which would still work out pretty well. And it would do incredibly well. So I think there is a lot of reason, there's a lot of financial incentive for Nintendo to not give up on this year. I think, there's going to be there's probably have been some delays or some reworkings, but I don't think it's going to be so significant that there won't be games. They're still going to come. I mean, Sony and Microsoft are coming out with games. Why can't Nintendo?
Oh yeah.
So I think
one thing,
it's gonna work
I don't think we've looked at from this particular angle is, I do believe the evidence, the data shows that the West is doing a lot worse with the virus than the East is. Like the East kind of was like, okay, we're going on lockdown, like we're taking care of this.
Oh yeah.
And they're starting to have, sports games and movies, theaters are opening up over there way faster than they are here, and less, actually safely. And they're starting to have places where coronavirus is just non-existent, like there's no new cases. Whereas, so there might be to the point soon where Japan, at least, might start actually being able to go back to their offices and work on stuff from the office.
And I actually thought that was kind of already happening. I don't know that, but I had heard, a random blurb on a podcast or something somewhere about it. And so, because you make a good point, obviously a big part of the problem for the industry is that in the West, in North America, the United States specifically, where we've done such a bad job, and we're the largest territory by volume for the industry. So if this country and this continent is in the situation we are, then it does have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry, as opposed to if another smaller territory would be the one struggling. Then it's like, yeah, that sucks, and so maybe this territory can't get XYZ. But when you have, the majority of Europe and the majority of Japan and Asia and North America in good status, that's when you can still get the majority of product out and sell the numbers you want to sell. And you've also got people back at work too, just like you said. But it's just crazy because, Nintendo's still talking about people working from home. I really thought that I had heard that Japan has done a really good job. And so I thought most people were already going back to work and things were opening, like you said.
They are doing a really good job. From what I understand, a lot of other countries obviously are way more cautious. So even though things are looking up, they don't want to reopen and then just everything goes back to as bad as it was. Yeah. So I think they're just being not overly cautious, but they're being,
they're being better than us.
They wanted to show consistently that they're not getting new cases.
Yeah,
it's
pretty embarrassing. I feel like Andres, the next time you go shopping for groceries or something, if you anyone you see not wearing a mask, you should just yell at that person and be like, "You're the reason I don't have Breath of the Wild 2 in 2020."
I got a mask in my pocket.
That's a great idea, actually.
Because those are the people who are doing it to all of us, man.
What if?
What if?
God, yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to take this moment to address a couple points brought up in the chat, and we'll get back to it. So Sav64 added me. I've been saying those games did not need a direct. Those should have been shown with individual trailers. And this is reference to the partner showcase.
Yeah.
I'm actually okay with the partner showcase. I just think the messaging need to be more clear. Like, I think they were clear about what it was, but I think they needed to say, hey, our first-party games, our major stuff is coming a little bit later. They needed to say something like that. Because without that, people think that this is the replacement, and that's not good. This is a smaller thing. I got Nindy Showcase vibes, which also gives me hope that maybe there is something a week or two from now. I know that's like being very optimistic here, but if you look at like the Nindy Showcases, there have been quite a few times where a actual Nintendo Direct followed not long afterwards. So I'm kind of hoping this is a similar situation, but I'm okay with it being a partner showcase. I think it might be a great way to share third-party games moving forward, especially if that means that with the major Nintendo Directs, as we have heard, Nintendo is sort of considering ways to sort of present it differently. Maybe those Nintendo Directs be the ones that don't have a mini in it. Those are just like big, like first and quote-unquote second-party like showcases where they show things like Bravely Default 2 and Bayonetta 3, but also your Zeldas, your Marios, your Metroids, your Pikmins, and that would be more, I don't want to say streamlined, but there'll be less up and downs because the core Nintendo fan base doesn't necessarily care about the smaller third-party stuff, but if it's just like a chock full of like first-party games, it's like almost all highs. So I think that could be a really killer presentation, but it also, with the partner showcases, it still offers a good avenue for smaller stuff to get that spotlight.
Yeah. I think they really should just move forward with calling those things partner presentation without the Nintendo Direct name. I think that...
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Yeah. I feel like the reason it was called a Direct was simply just to say that they had... Yeah, just to get attention and then just be like, oh, but it's a mini. Oh, but on top of that, it's also a partner showcase.
But also, it's this new thing that you've never seen and you definitely won't like, is basically. Right. And I mean, I really think that simple branding change could go a long way with those things, because inherently, 10-minute shows that are just small third-party trailer packages are not bad. No. But in the climate that this last one was released, and with the package of it being a Nintendo Direct as the title, it was just
right. As the only one we know about, too.
Only thing that we knew about, and I honestly want to believe that if there really is another Nintendo Direct we can expect that's more like a typical Direct or more about the big stuff, I feel like August is the time. I feel like 1 month later, it's the last true month of summer, and it gives you that nice several-month lead time into the fall games of, October, November. That next month, August, the last month of summer, I think is the time. And I don't think it would be crazy, kind of like you were just saying, Andres, like for them to do this weird Direct mini partner thing, and then only 4 weeks later in August, just have a regular Direct. I think that timing totally can work out, and it feels like something Nintendo would do, especially now in the weird 2020 pandemic year,
Yeah, and I think August is kind of the last month where you can really announce like really big things and have a decent like marketing time for them before they release.
Including a Zelda, for example. Like if they were going to do it, if they really truly wanted to be like, yo, we're committing, here comes Breath of the Wild 2, November 2020, then like August has to be the time that they confirm that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the latest that they can. Otherwise it's just not enough. It's just not enough marketing for that big of a game.
There's not, and that could be perfect because they could do August, a couple weeks from now. Here's a 20-minute Nintendo Direct. Here's Breath of the Wild 2. Here's the title. It comes out in November. And then in like late October, they can do a treehouse for that game. And then they get a perfect 30 minutes of like, let's just dive deep into some Breath of the Wild 2 stuff similar to E3 for the first game. And you've got your truncated little 5-6 month window of hype for a huge game that'll sell like crazy. I think that could work perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely starting to look like August is just not going to have like a major Nintendo release, and that's fine. There usually are a couple months in the year where Nintendo skips things, but as they just have to make an announcement. So I think a presentation in August is kind of the right timing because there could still be enough time to have a game come out in September, which I do think they need to have something in September. I don't think they can go both August and September without a game. I just don't see that happening. August.
I'll be very curious to see. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'll just you go.
Well, it's all the delay, guys. The delay, the 3 seconds makes things so hard sometimes. All I was gonna say is I would be curious to finally learn what Paper Mario's sales numbers have been when we finally get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've gotten some from Japan, and they're not bad. They're definitely like way better than Color Splash, but they're not even as good as like how Sticker Store sold.
Yeah.
But it's not that far off. I mean, the sales for Paper Mario are very close, other than Color Splash, which is just trailing. It's not terrible. I think it's sold like 108,000 or so copies, whereas like Thousand Year Door sold like 150,000 in its first.
And that's in Japan, right?
Yeah, in Japan.
Yeah.
So it's doing
good numbers.
It's doing good. It's not doing like horrible, but it's definitely like the Paper Mario series. That name has been tarnished so much over the years that
so sad
the fact that this wasn't an exact return to form that was, every single tiny thing the fans wanted meant that it wasn't going to sell like super well.
Yeah. So I just want to address this super chat right here. Ryan Stefan, thank you so much. Ryan was just saying hi. Great convo so far. Thank you. Also, Ronnie Fazio added us. He said, hey, I just got off work. Glad to see that you and Rob have become friends. Yeah, we're friends, and it's good to have him on the show.
Indeed. Yes.
Yeah. It's a good time. And I see Tamale here's bring up L is real. So I did say we would talk a little bit about the prototype leaks and Brie Larson wanting to be in Metroid. So I want to take a quick detour, talk about these little things first, and then we'll come back to this, because I still feel like there's some things to sort of get into with this partner showcase thing. But I know some people want to talk about this L is real situation. So, and I don't think there's really that much to say. I just think it's really cool, and we're not gonna show any shots of any of these prototypes or anything like that, because
we don't want to get
Nintendo might not like that.
Ninjas.
So yeah, I could get in trouble. So I'm not gonna touch that in terms of showing it. But basically what happened, there was a whole bunch of prototypes and source codes for a whole bunch of classic Nintendo games leaked. A whole bunch. And this includes things like for Zelda 64 before it was Ocarina of Time. It includes voice and sound clips from other Nintendo games and stuff from Star Fox. And Pokemon Pearl and Diamond also got leaked. There's a whole bunch of Gen 4 sprites for that were before they were there's a red Garchomp, for example. And then the big one everyone's talking about is Luigi being in the source code for Mario 64. And how there were plans of having some sort of multiplayer co-op thing going on between the both of them. And that would have been really interesting. It never materialized, though. But what makes things somewhat spooky or just kind of interesting is that the statue behind the castle with the big star with the booze, supposedly people were interpreting that little blurry mess to read L is real 2401. What's interesting, what people pointed out yesterday when this all blew up, when that information came out, was that it was exactly 24 years and 1 month after the release for Mario 64. Now, I don't think that has any particular significance, but it's just kind of either a neat coincidence or whoever had access to this information decided to intentionally leak it then or something. But it's just kind of a neat little spooky kind of thing. And
there's a lot
Luigi's in the game.
Of different mathematical ways you can put the 2401 numbers that match up with the date and different things like that. I highly did. Some people are like, "Oh, Nintendo's planned this all along." Really? Nintendo planned 24 years ago that they were gonna leak their own stuff in 24 years and 1 month? No. That did not happen.
It's actually all an elaborate
plan. Do you realize who was president of
Mario
Nintendo back then? The guy was strict.
Yeah, was it Yamauchi? I think
so.
Yeah. Completely different way the company was run back then.
Well, in 1995, 96, too, no one was thinking about the year 2020, man. That seemed like an impossible.
That was the future.
There's no way.
They were saying we'd have hover bikes and stuff.
Yeah, we should be in flying cars right now based on that.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you that it might be working out for Nintendo, though, because people are still talking. Nintendo doesn't have games, but people are still talking about them.
It's true.
And maybe the reason all this stuff is being leaked right now is because people are stuck at home. And so people have more access, and these things are coming out, and people are having more time to focus on things. Like, because there aren't a lot of Nintendo announcements right now, Nintendo fans are looking for other sources to get their Nintendo fix, I guess.
It's the only news to talk about. Yeah, I joked about that in my last video. It's like, well, still talking about the Direct Mini because there is no other Nintendo stuff to talk about.
No official stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, no official stuff, right? And this is just kind of what it is. And we were talking about this a little bit before we went live too. How this is like the third or fourth kind of source code leak or something that's happened over the course of the past year. Like, not really the biggest news to me. It's not something I super care about, but the L is real thing is definitely fascinating, just because it's kind of like delivering on this fan urban legend that had been brewing since the 90s, when it was harder for those things to get out there. Like the internet in the mid to late 90s didn't really travel conversation the way it does nowadays by any stretch. And this thing has been around for so long, and now it's like, oh, looks like Luigi maybe was going to be in the game. It's not even really the biggest revelation if you take the L is real thing away from it. If that never existed...
Oh, it totally wasn't. I think it's just one of those cases where, when you're young and you're just hanging out with your friends and somebody tells you something that's in a game and it's just not. Like, I remember
back
Smash
then,
Brothers
when
Brawl,
really
people used to say that Wolf Link was in the game. In my community, that was like a big thing. Everybody was like, try to figure out how to... In Smash Brothers Brawl. Like, everybody was like, try to figure out how to unlock Wolf Link. He's not in the game. It's just kind of one of those things where it's like a childhood like playground story ends up being like a thing that was actually planned. You're like, oh wow.
Yeah, and that's the best stuff. Like, we all get nostalgic from that stuff, and I think I got a couple years on you guys. I'm from the generation where that conversation for us was really around like Mortal Kombat in the arcades. There were so many rumors about Reptile jumping down and this silhouette passing in front of the moon. It really means that this thing is going to happen, and all the Ermac stuff and the Noob Saibot stuff like that. And it was like, just like you're saying, with the Mario thing, it's that stuff of legend that you think about. Oh my God, like, this is what, they're doing this and it means this and this is going to happen. And if you play at 6 p.m. on a Thursday upside down with your left shoe on your right one, you unlock this crazy thing and Mario turns into Harry Potter, like, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And they just got your imagination firing like crazy when you were a kid, and it was so much fun. And in the age of the internet, which I think is kind of what you're saying, it's definitely not the same. So it's cool to see one of those things from that era actually be delivered upon.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, just having Luigi and Mario 64, like, okay, it's not a big deal other than this one thing, right? It's like, okay.
Right.
But
I think some of the cooler parts for me were like some of the assets that were leaked, like some of the really high quality source assets. I mean, a lot of the stuff was for like N64, like Game Boy and stuff like that, which had like, obviously super compressed. Like, you listen to like the audio, like the uncompressed audio for Star Fox 64 is so good. Not only did that game run the N64, so obviously it had a lot of audio compression, but it had like voice filters and stuff over it for the game, to sound like how it should. But being able to hear them like no compression, just like the bass audio, is so cool.
I might have to look that up. That the audio would be pretty cool.
Yeah. There is like the there's that famous wording that Mario uses when he's throwing Bowser that's always been debated. Right?
I just saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard it in high quality. It sounds the exact same. Like, oh wow, what the heck was it actually supposed to be saying?
Yeah. Who knows?
I still feel like it's not super clear, but it's just interesting. It's super interesting stuff, and because especially like when you go back to the games when you play them and there was no internet access. Like, for me, I spent hours trying to follow Yoshi. Like, where does Yoshi go when he jumps into the waterfall? How do I get there?
Oh,
yeah. My friends would tell me that it leads to Yoshi's story, and that was a lie. It was just a separate game.
But those things were so much fun. Did you guys ever get into the GoldenEye rumor, too? About, there's that island in the first level of GoldenEye that was... it's like you're crossing a bridge, and there's like this... It's like a fortress or a prison or something across the lake, and there was this whole big thing that existed around what that was, and it was a secret level, or it was a level that was planned that was never finished, or all, and like, what are the ways to break the code to get over there? And eventually, years later, they did, and it's exactly just an unfinished little island. but you can see it from the game, and it spawned a whole conversation of rumors.
Which is
like
super
years.
interesting.
I'd never heard of that. I did play
Look it up
GoldenEye
after
back
this.
in the day, but I
look it up
really
after
think
this.
about that.
It's really cool. It's pretty neat. You should look it up.
Cool.
So like I guess just kind of I'm gonna sort of like use this to talk a bit about the Mario remasters that may or may not happen, but given the source code obviously still exists for Mario 64, so I have to imagine it's got to be somewhat easy for Nintendo to remaster Mario 64, and like you look at some of the Unreal footage or just different things that people have played around with the source code of Mario 64, like there's some fairly good looking stuff. So I gotta think that if these Mario remasters are real, I'm willing to bet that they are, that Mario 64 is probably going to get some nice enhancements. Maybe, I don't expect it to look like Mario Odyssey, but I do think it could be kind of like a definitive edition situation. Like, they're going to do a decent amount of changes, kind of like what they did with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, where some new models, new textures, things of that nature, and even some new content. Now, what kind of new content? I don't think it's going to be 64 DS, because that was like a different like look and engine, and it was just kind of different. I don't expect it. If they add it, great. I would love 30 more stars in minigames, but I just don't expect that. But considering this whole L is real thing and how Luigi does seem to have been initially planned for Mario 64, it wouldn't surprise me if Luigi's playable in the Mario remasters. I see that happening.
It'd be better than the playable characters in the DS remake.
Yoshi and Toad and
freaking
Wario.
Yeah. Like, why?
Yeah, Wario. Yeah, I think Wario.
Why Wario?
They could call it Mario and Luigi 64. Like, that could be the branding if you wanted to really pump that. You know what I'm saying?
That'd be very interesting.
It could be very, very cool.
Especially, I want a couple extra levels, but
Luigi better play differently. Like, they better give him like different physics or something if they actually.
Would they give him that jump? I mean, there was a Galaxy 2 was where there was a couple ways to play as Luigi. Am I remembering that right?
You can play as Luigi in both games. I'm pretty sure.
Was it in the first one? I don't remember. I thought it was only 2, but I could be wrong.
No, yeah, definitely in the first one.
I think I think Luigi
In fact, you could play the entire game as Luigi in the first one.
But you had to beat it all the way through.
You have to unlock them or something.
You do. You had to unlock them.
Yeah.
And in the second game, you only could do it for like certain missions. It wasn't.
See, that's what I'm thinking of. Where he wasn't. You couldn't just like be Luigi. Like, you had to activate Luigi for some levels or something.
Yeah, which is probably how they would do it in Mario 64. Simply because I don't think those levels were designed at all for somebody who can jump higher and is more floaty. Like, I don't know, like if you like break the game being able to jump higher in certain scenarios.
That's why you play test.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and depending on how far they want to go into balancing and changing the game, like I had a little bit of a change of heart on what I think they might do with Mario 64 literally in the last couple of weeks, because I tend to rely more on the side of it's either going to be just a straight port or they're just going to give it an HD polish, just a nice sheen, wipe over, here it is in HD, anti-aliasing, here you go. But I reminded myself of like when Nintendo really does do more than we ask, and Link's Awakening was really that title where I was like, man, they really went above and beyond for Link's Awakening. If you think
that was an actual
remake. Very good job.
Yeah, I mean, Samus Returns is another one,
and so my favorite.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so the amount of effort to take those two original games and turn them into what the final products were is astounding if you think about it. And Nintendo's not the only company doing it. Sony did it with Shadow of the Colossus, and that was amazing too. But Nintendo's shown that they're willing to do that when the game calls for it. They've done a Metroid. They've done a Zelda. Why wouldn't they do it with one of their most famous Mario games, the 64, and put that on the Switch and really give it the Nintendo polish and just, redo all of the lighting and textures and models. And that's where they might be willing to put in Luigi. And maybe they'd be willing to somehow rebalance the layout of some levels. I mean, it's an insane amount of work, it sounds like, but they've shown they're willing to do that. So, they might. They really might.
Sunshine and Galaxy, assuming it's still a collection, Sunshine and Galaxy, I think, would be more just like we were initially saying, like they'll just be, upscaled to HD with some quality of life changes, and that's pretty much it. Maybe they'll give them like HD textures, but that's pretty much it.
I mean,
which would be great.
Yeah. Looking at this leak, it's obvious that Nintendo. I mean, we've known this before this leak, but Nintendo keeps like everything. When they make a game, they just like store everything. So they have the high resolution, development textures and assets for Galaxy and Sunshine. Like, so it wouldn't be like that.
They could do it.
It would be just as easy as they did with Wind Waker, which they put together in 6 months. To just slap the textures in there and maybe throw it into that same engine they use for Wind Waker HD and have that like advanced lighting model they use for that game.
See that, and those are the kinds of things that I would really like to that game. You know, when they change the textures and they change the lighting. Lighting is that thing that cannot be understated. How much it impacts the game.
It is one of the most that's why ray tracing is such like a big thing. Because lighting a game. You can have a really great looking game. If it has primitive lighting, it looks terrible.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
So there's a couple questions in chat I want to address. So this one is more to what we're talking about. I'm going to get to Birdman's in a little bit. But Embluet said, are we forgetting Mario 64 DS adding 3 new characters? Well, we're not. We remember, but I think it's interesting because I think we're all in agreement that we don't really expect the 64 DS content. We're kind of expecting this to be a remaster of the original 64.
All right. I think they might add the extra like stars in, just because I don't think that would be as difficult to do. And they've done that for different like definitive editions and like ultimate editions or whatever, like remasters and things before.
I think the content from DS has a good chance. I mean, I could go 50-50 on it.
Yeah.
But I think the reason it would make sense is because it's just like it's already made extra content that they can use to sell the game. Like it's not like they'd have to create new content. If they would just have to remaster other already existing new content and new stars. And so if they didn't do it, I think we'd be happy with it. But if they wanted to go the extra mile to make it more appealing, they could very easily be like, oh, the extra stars from DS are also included. And people would be like, holy crap.
And Mario 64 is not a big game by any stretch of the imagination.
By today's standards, no. Well, at the time, it was massive. It was life-changing.
But the game,
but nowadays, it's tiny.
Because of this leaks, though, we now know that development for Mario 64 was like less than a year and a half or something. It was like not a long time. It was about a year and a half. Which is kind of insane considering how monumental that game was. But that kind of also... Go on.
I was going to ask, related but also a tangent, have you guys ever seen the footage of at CES when Nintendo first showed off Mario 64? And they start moving Mario with the analog stick, which was a brand new thing at the time. And watching and hearing the press like get excited as they show, if you move it a little bit, Mario tiptoes, and the faster you move it, the quicker he walks, which we're so used to now.
But it must have been mind-blowing at the time.
Mind-blowing. And there's a great clip of them demoing that, and it's like this is 25 years ago, so they're literally demoing it on just a little CRTV for the press. Like nothing like how they would do it now. But you should look. It's like probably like a minute-long clip. It's amazing. It just fills you with that Nintendo magic of like, man, they were changing the game with every release back in the 90s. It's a very, very cool trip down memory lane. You should look it up.
Now, that does seem very, very interesting. I mean, the N64 was just like a time of innovation. Like they created, they pioneered so much then. I mean, GoldenEye, first-person shooters just moving forward. Zelda, adventure games moving forward. Mario 64, just 3D games, period, moving forward. And it was just kind of crazy what they accomplished then. Yeah, like, yes, going back to them now, they are rough around the edges, but they did so much. And for me, I was just a kid. Like, I was born in 91, so N64 was my first system actually playing it. So, like, I grew up with that as, like, the standard. But it's just kind of crazy to think about what they, like, just going from Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis to 3D environments and being able to move around the camera and having analog control was just...
It was huge.
Yeah, it seems crazy.
Well, and Zelda's influence can't be understated, which you bring up, because that introduced Z targeting, which is still an industry standard for so many games. The ability, a lot of games do it with the R3 where you just click that, but just any ability to lock on to an enemy when you attack it, which Dark Souls uses and The Witcher uses, and just every game, Horizon Zero Dawn, you name it. People use that, and that came from Ocarina of Time. Nintendo was like, okay, we're going to move our action sword-swinging adventure game into 3D, and 3D is really new and scary, so like, how do we make this work? Well, let's devise this thing using a fairy that's like the reason Navi was included, to give you like an organic in-universe reason to be attached to the person you're fighting, and then for the camera to be attached to that. It's an ingenious way to solve a brand new problem at that time, and it's been 22 years and we're still doing it. It's amazing.
It's just kind of mind-blowing me to think about just how much Nintendo's development teams were able to do back then. Like, when you think about what their games accomplished, it's just almost like, at least for me, looking back on them, like, it just feels like they were just head and shoulders above everyone else, or most other developers. And I still think, to some extent, they can do that. Like, you look at Breath of the Wild, like, it's very clear that Nintendo still has that kind of crazy talent with their development teams where they can still be pioneers. But it's just kind of mind-blowing to think back on what they're capable of doing, which, again, sort of reaffirms my unhealthy excitement for when they eventually give us new games. Like, what are they going to show? Like, I'm looking forward to original stuff, because I think there's just some crazy stuff they could come up with. So I'm excited for.
I mean, I was born in '99, so I wouldn't say like I should not have grown up with the N64, but I did. Like, that was my main system I played when I was young. Yeah, and I'm always like, yes, thank God my parents were behind the times.
Was that your actual first console? Was the 64, or did you come back to it?
It was the 64. It was the 64 was my first console.
Nice.
We didn't get a GameCube till like the Wii was almost out. So
okay.
It was a while.
Good times.
Yeah, I grew up with Ocarina of Time and Mario 64 and all of those games, GoldenEye.
That's amazing. It's kind of from me and my generation, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, I think it's amazing that you guys got to grow up with like your first Zelda, because Andres, you're a little bit older, but you said 64 first, so you guys really grew up with like your first Zelda was Ocarina of Time, and your first Mario was probably 64, which are some of the best games ever made, and like some of the best in those respective series. But you also ended up missing out like what it felt like to see those for the first time, right?
That's
having
true.
Having grown up with the other ones.
I definitely don't appreciate like 2D games as much as like people who grew up with them did. I like a 2D game like here and there, but like 2D Mario versus 3D Mario, it's not even comparable. Like, I'm gonna pick 3D Mario.
For what it's worth, my personal opinion as somebody who did grow up on the 2D stuff, I still prefer. I think the best 3D Mario games are better than the best 2D Mario games. But I do still think 2D Mario is amazing. I mean,
I still will play Donkey Kong
World,
Country and love it. So it's not like 2D games are like, oh, how dare.
For sure.
But
totally.
It's definitely 3D is king, because that's right. I grew up on.
So
that makes sense.
For me, because I grew up on the 3D games, and I would say growing up as a kid, I was like, I don't want to go to 2D unless it's on the Game Boy. Then on the Game Boy, it's okay. That's fine.
Right. Yeah.
But I would say that. And I started dabbling with some of the classic games with Wii Virtual Console, like I tried out Kid Icarus and things, and I fell in love with those games. But I really loved my Wii U for Virtual Console, because that's where I went back when we had the dry spells on Wii U, which there's more dry than
many
games. That's where I really delved into some of the classic games. Like I played Super Metroid and fell in love with it. Played Link to the
Super
Past,
Metroid's great.
Fell in love with it. And I do feel like those games have aged really well. They're still really good games. Which one?
I Link to the Past. I don't like it that much, to be honest. I know a lot of people are going to burn me at the stake. I am a huge Zelda fan. I've played almost every single game in the series, and that one's just not that good. Link to the Past is just okay at best.
Well, that's a hot
It's
take.
really frustrating. The map is terrible. Knowing where you're supposed to go is just the worst.
You're entitled to your opinion, but only after a certain point.
I am a massive Zelda fan, so it's not bad. It's definitely not as bad as some of the DS games, but it's just there's way better 2D Zelda games out there.
It's a unique take, and I mean, I guess to your credit, I'll say it's a unique take, and of course that's totally okay, and it makes sense. Everyone's background is different, everyone's age is different. Like, you can't demand people like video games made from before they were born. You can't demand people like movies that were made from before they were born. Some people can't watch the original Star Wars movies. Breaks my heart, but they can't because they're so old. And it's like, that's just what it is.
I think if I grew up on it, I would have enjoyed it. But playing it today, like after playing the newer 2D Zeldas,
Yeah.
and the 3D Zeldas, and like a Link Between Worlds is 100% better than A Link to the Past.
I love Link Between Worlds.
I will say I loved Link to the Past's atmosphere. The atmosphere in Link to the Past
it's so
is
good.
exceptional. It's so
That
good.
music,
It's just
man.
the game itself is just okay. The
The
atmosphere,
only-
top notch, 10 out of 10. Game itself,
Well, that's cool.
it's all right.
Okay. I mean, because that whole changing world mechanic was just so crazy. Like when the Super Nintendo came out, and it's like, and just see what those graphics were. I mean, I remember playing the original
I don't have any
Zelda.
of that kind of stuff. Seeing it from
and
another
that's
angle,
and it's unavoidable, right? Like that's fine. There's millions of people who are your age or younger, obviously, who feel the same way, and so it totally makes sense.
I always
and totally
cry
get
when
it.
someone tells me Ocarina of Time is bad. Like,
That's
would cry
actually
too.
not allowed.
I
That's
have
just not
heard
a thing.
people.
you're talking about
complain
literally
Mario
the
64 is
highest rated
bad.
game of all time. So
I watched
Yeah.
somebody play Mario 64 for the first time, and they thought it was bad, and I cried.
See, so that's how it feels when we hear you say that Link to the Past isn't amazing. It's
Then
the
again,
same thing.
there's definitely an argument for Mario 64 not aging nearly as good as some of the other.
Oh, I
N64
agree with
Would-
that.
yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you what, I'm somebody, my favorite video game console of all time is the Nintendo 64, but not because playing the Nintendo 64 in 2020 is an amazing game experience. It's my favorite because at the time that it came out and was relevant, it was the most incredible shift in gaming we'd ever seen, and all those games were amazing in their day. But playing Ocarina and Mario 64 today for the first time, or GoldenEye, or Turok Dinosaur Hunter, whatever,
all
it's
amazing
Perfect
games.
Dark.
Yeah.
I mean, they are amazing games, but we grew up on them, so we play them and we're like, man, remember when these were the bomb? But
They
if you
haven't
play them
aged
for the
well.
first time now, they haven't aged well.
No.
And
I
that's-
think GameCube was really the first like 3D generation. That generation was the first 3D generation where games like held up. Like you can still go back and play Twilight Princess and Wind Waker and Combat Evolved and things like that, and they play fine.
Oh, 100%.
N64, not as
Yeah,
much.
and you know what? That's the same for the 32-bit stuff too. You know, so even PlayStation 1 and Saturn games, like the weird, hardcore, polygonal, goofy stuff, like those are games that, you know, Crash Bandicoot and Cool Borders and those old Madden games. It's the same thing. Like that whole generation, that whole era, because that was the era, was, you know, 64, Saturn, PS1. All across the board, they don't age well. But as soon as, just like you said, Brandon, as soon as we went into that 6th gen with GameCube, PS2, Xbox, that's where games are still holding up not so bad today. And there are games, you know, you can play Twilight Princess and you can play Mario Sunshine, even though people hate it. But like these games hold up. Halo, like you said. Yeah, Sunshine is amazing. People are insane. Okay,
Sunshine is
I'm
not
sorry.
amazing.
It's not amazing.
It's
I will
not
retract
great.
that. It's
It's
good.
okay. It's okay.
I'm telling
better
you,
than okay,
when
but
this
it's not
game is
amazing.
remastered, people are gonna be like,
When?
"Oh wait, this is a good game."
I played Sunshine. It's
Yeah,
I would.
It's rough. It's definitely a game that if they remastered, they have an opportunity to make it the right game. They have an opportunity to fix problems.
Yeah.
So
Well, my
that
thing is,
part
I
for
just
sure.
didn't find the missions that fun or interesting. To be honest, I thought the graphics were great, especially at the time. I remember seeing that on my friend's GameCube and be like, "Oh my god!"
my favorite
That
thing to
water.
do with the water was to get the. Which one was it? It was there was the one that allowed you to like go really fast.
Yeah, like a jet.
Yeah.
Jet.
Yes.
so-
I know what you're talking about.
So for me,
The
it
jet
was
nozzle or
it was
whatever
funny
it was.
because like I was also a big fan of Dragon Ball Z. So I would get in the water
Yeah.
and I'd be like Kamehameha, and it would just charge up and just blow through the water, create these little waves, and it would just fly through. Just really, really well realized water graphics for the time. Like it was just
You guys amazing.
gorgeous. Yeah.
I'd say Delfino Island, awesome. The atmosphere of Sunshine, awesome. Graphics, awesome. Story,
Definitely.
horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible story. And the gameplay was, I think the way Mario controlled, so much better than the 64. I just thought the missions were less interesting and more repetitive. Like, getting the shines wasn't as fun as getting the stars in Mario 64.
See, I'm actually in kind of the opposite boat. Not on the 64 stuff, because I think 64 is superior in every way. But I will say that I actually think it's the control of the game that's really needs work and wasn't the best. And I actually liked the missions. I mean, I get that you don't, and that's fine. But
Right.
I guess part of the reason I never really stopped enjoying that game is because I feel like it's just really creative. I thought that they were like, it's some of Nintendo's top creativity in that game before they really, went overboard with Galaxy and made, in my opinion, the best Mario game. But leading up to Galaxy, I love the whole concept of Delfino Island, like you said, and I love those missions and all the different areas you go to and using the flood to clean things up. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's not a perfect game, but it works for me.
I like the concept of Sunshine. I just don't really like how it was executed.
Yeah. It is not perfect. And like I said, I went overboard initially. And I was like, that game's amazing.
100%.
Because it's not amazing. It's just, I just see it as a very good game. But it's
I think if they hadn't wanted it, like, at the launch of the GameCube, like, that game was rushed so hard.
It was in the first year, yeah.
This is how I rank the 3D Mario games. And I rank them in terms of, like, how I compare them for their respective times.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, Mario 64 has to be first. But I'll actually argue that just Mario 64 is more innovative, but I'm gonna place, it's kind of tough because Odyssey and Galaxy are like right there, but I'm gonna place
not for me.
Galaxy. The Galaxy 2 is first for me.
Really?
Okay.
Then Galaxy 1, then Odyssey. Just because, and they're all like basically sandwiched on top of each other.
See, I can't.
Hold on. Let me finish.
Yeah.
And
He's like,
then,
let me finish.
Don't worry.
And then I put 64. Even though it's like the most innovative game, I just think in terms of like, if you take innovation, just how good the game is, that's where I kind of rank it. Like, it's it's weird for me because I'm saying for its perspective time, but like basically I'm not trying to count its limitations against it, but I'm also not trying to count its innovations against it. Like, just like the experience.
Yeah.
So that's why I put 64 there. And then, well, actually, I think 64 is better, has more replay value than Odyssey. So I'll put it above Odyssey.
Yes.
And then Sunshine, then 3D Land, and then 3D World. 3D World is my least favorite Mario game.
See, for me, replayability
I still like it 100%.
is not a factor with games. I don't replay games very often, and I don't like to replay games very often. I just don't have time, and there's so much out there that I just want a really good experience that I can play one time and be like, dude, that was amazing. On to the next game.
Yeah.
So
do you ever come back to games way later?
I do sometimes. If it's a big enough game, like Zelda Breath of the Wild, I'll still play that every once in a while. It won't be that long. It'll be like an hour. But I still like hop on and like, just remember how good this game is, Yeah. I played it in the VR mode just like last week. And
I heard
it really
it was
makes me want
VR.
Nintendo. Oh no, it's amazing.
Is it? Okay. I heard it made people
terrible. It doesn't make me sick at all personally. Just from the way the camera isn't usually moving that much, so it's not like a game where it's not like a first-person shooter where you move the camera always and your head's moving. Yeah. So you don't really get motion sick. For me, it's just that the resolution's really low and the frame rate is not great. I mean, it's not great in the base game, but I mean, you're running the game. You're essentially running the game twice in handheld mode. So
yeah.
But if they had, my point was, I really want them to release a VR system because it's so uncomfortable. But as far as Mario 64
you have to hold it up to your head, like it's crazy.
Yeah. See, I lay down and I have it resting on my head, but the problem with that is the Switch is kind of heavy for that. It feels light in the hand, but when you lay it on your head with plastic digging in your face, it feels a lot heavier.
I'm sure.
So yeah, but I don't know. If I had to rate the Mario games, the 3D Mario games, I think Mario 64 would be top, and then Mario Odyssey. I don't think I'd put Galaxy above Odyssey. Simply because going back and actually like looking at Galaxy, unfortunately I can't go back and actually play it for myself because I don't have the hardware. I guess I can emulate it. But going back and looking and like rethinking about Mario Galaxy, it's really not as like great as I remember it. It's definitely very different from the other 3D Mario games. It's not a sandbox game. It's definitely like a level game. And it feels like that compromises it a bit in my opinion. Like it's like the 3D World problem, but obviously way less of a problem. Like it's linear levels that don't really offer you not even close to as much exploration in them as the typical sandbox 3D Mario. Like that, the Galaxy is just inferior in every way as a formula, in my opinion, for 3D Mario than Odyssey is.
I have many different opinions about that.
I think it's a great game. I just don't think it's 3D Mario. Like, it's not true to that initial vision of what 3D Mario is supposed to be.
Well, I would argue that it kind of is, in the sense that, to me, really, Odyssey was the one that broke the formula. Because to me, what I saw with Galaxy was Nintendo following a formula that they started with Mario 64, where I will give you the one thing where like the castle in Mario 64, you could argue was like an open world part to that game, because there is places and secrets to discover, but it kind of also really wasn't. It was more of a hub than an open world. And so with Mario 64, they came out with this mechanic of like, here's just a bunch of different worlds planted throughout the game, and each world has whatever 6, 7, 8 stars, and you go back and do new missions to get each star. And you get the stars to unlock the final battle, and then you do the final battle. That's exactly what the shines were in Mario Sunshine, which used Delfino Plaza as a proxy for Hyrule Castle. Then you get to Galaxy 1, and the observatory becomes the proxy for that, and it's the same thing, and you're just getting more stars. And then Galaxy 2 kind of did the same thing, but with the map system. Really, Odyssey is the game that came out and kind of broke that formula by saying, here's just a bunch of huge worlds and huge maps, and we're not giving you missions to go find the thing, which in this game are moons. There's just moons just sprinkled throughout the map.
I will say the way they do missions in Galaxy is very different from what they did in 64. Like in 64, it was like, here's a mission where we're not going to tell you what to do. Like, here's a level, go figure out the different things you can do to get stars.
It's all about the title. The title of the level was your hint to what you had to do.
Right. In Galaxy, it's follow this path, defeat these enemies in this order, defeat this boss, and then get your star. Like, it was very clear what you were supposed to do, exactly where you're supposed to go at all times.
Yeah, and Odyssey was also like, pull up this map we've now given you with the location of the things you're looking for, which was also something none of the previous 4 games had done.
I feel like Odyssey is like an evolution of the Mario 64 concept in a modern sense. Whereas Galaxy is like taking that concept and changing it to be more linear.
Yeah, for me, it's like, because I rank Galaxy above, just because I think about the impression it had left with me and that experience. But at the same time, I'll also say I really wanted the exploration. So, like, I don't want Nintendo to go away from the exploration, but I also love the challenge and the, like, linear levels in Galaxy. And to that point, Odyssey does have some of those, and I really like those levels a lot. So, I guess ultimately what I want is Galaxy, just with more exploration.
Yeah. I think the original Galaxy also did a better job than Galaxy 2 did. Galaxy 2 removed any like semblance of like a good story, removed a good hub. Like, it has a hub, but it sucks. You're moving around on a map screen. You're not,
they were trying to go back to a formula from the NES days and Super NES days, which was, I think, a great concept. I think their heart was in the right place, and they still made an amazing game. I mean, the game reviewed like crazy. I'm not going to say anything bad about Galaxy 2 other than I just didn't like it as much as Galaxy 1, really.
Yeah.
Because Galaxy 1 was newer and fresher, and I agree with you that Galaxy is absolutely a more linear game without question. And even though Odyssey, I've said it on Twitter, like, I think Odyssey is a bit overrated. Yeah, I know I might get outnumbered here. I think it's a bit overrated.
It's not as good as Breath of the Wild.
Definitely not. Definitely. And I don't think it's as good as most Mario games. I made a top 10 Mario, and I think I placed it at like number 7 or so.
I would. That's a little low.
I would place it at number 1, to be honest. It's my favorite.
I think with Odyssey, Andres, you called it like an evolution, and I totally agree with you. Like, there's the best parts about Odyssey was the concept, the open worldness of it, and the gameplay. The controls and the gameplay is fantastic. Like, Mario just controls so well in that game, and the variety. I think that I just found it's just something about the game that just bores me. It really just comes down to that. And I don't love the 1,000 moons, just you trip over them here and there. I didn't really love that stuff. So I like the idea of taking the best of Galaxy and the best of Odyssey and making a more superior game to both next time.
Because I think there is that opportunity to do that. Yeah,
I do agree. I think Odyssey, as much as it excelled in open sandbox environments, it also didn't have enough linearity to it in a way. So if they can mix that in, because I love the idea of running around the world, finding moves or finding moons and doing stuff, but we need more missions as well.
That's what it is. It's putting you in that world, having those side like galaxy-like levels in there. I think that's still a great part of it. But that focus of giving you a mission, like going in there and like, all right, this time we're doing this. And honestly, the levels did like kind of tell a story. Like with Sunshine and 64, those levels still told the story, but they would be told mission by mission. In Odyssey, like once you accomplish something, you don't go back. You know what I mean? Like the world sort of changed a little bit. I think if they were to kind of give us that open structure with the galaxy style levels in there as well, but have that mission focus and that kind of tells a narrative mission by mission of that world, I think that might be the right way to go about it.
I don't really think they need to do that. Personally, I really like the way the story was told in Odyssey. I think it's perfect. I love how the world changes with you as you progress. I think that makes the world feel a lot more alive and real. What I think they should do is more like secret levels. Like you should be able to stumble across more platforming challenges, because they have those. Like you were saying, like they have those little platforming challenges. I think there should be more of those, and they should be more complex. Like they're pretty simple and short for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah, they're simple in design, but they're really difficult in challenge.
Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah.
I think they're great. There just need to be more of those. They need to be more complex.
So I want to kind of move ahead in the interest of time, because I want to get back to the direct stuff, but also we want to talk a little bit about Metroid here. But Birdman had a question that I said I would get to, so here's the question or point that was brought up. Nintendo will have a financial meeting on August 6th. So what will Nintendo say to their investors? I wonder. That's an interesting point, and I've kind of been back and forth on it personally on this matter. Like, do the shareholders and investors meetings like sort of push Nintendo to make announcements sooner so their investors can be aware of it? And I had a discussion with my friend the other day who doesn't have as much knowledge with the game industry, but has a lot more knowledge with like investing. And I think a lot of investors don't necessarily care about the game specifically, so there isn't necessarily a need to make those announcements.
If you're going to make money, they don't care how you make it. You could be selling illegal things in the black market. They'd be like, I don't know, I got my check. Who cares?
Yeah, I had a question show up like in a live stream or a Q&A or something I did in the last couple of weeks that kind of was along this line of thinking, and I had a very similar response. It's like thinking about what Nintendo is doing from the fan perspective or the consumer perspective is so different than the investor perspective. And so Nintendo doesn't need to let them know about, Nintendo Directs mean this and this game means this. Like the only advantage Nintendo has to telling them about those things is because it means something for the bottom line of their wallet, not because they're worried about satisfying people. And I think a lot of people who are struggling with what Nintendo are doing are getting confused with exactly what Nintendo tells investors and what they tell us and don't tell us. And it's like, those meetings aren't about the same thing. Like those investors aren't waiting to hear about a Nintendo Direct because they just want games to play. They want to know a Nintendo Direct might happen because it's going to bolster the price of Nintendo stock. It's a very different messaging and a different motivation, like you're saying.
But to that, even though I don't think they need to like be given specific announcements, I do also think that did I turn my mic off or?
No, you're good. You're good.
Because I tapped the dial. But what I was saying though is that I think we are starting to get to a point though where their silence is starting to impact things. Like it could actually have an impact on sales, because even though Microsoft and Sony, their presentations weren't like so great that I think Nintendo couldn't counter that. I think if Nintendo doesn't counter it, some fans are just going to focus on them, and they're going to lose some sales to that.
They do need to know that you have a product that you're selling.
So I think eventually, if they take longer, like maybe with this investors meeting, they'll just say, hey, so, fans, it seems like the public opinion is changing a little bit right now. I could see maybe, I don't really know their perspective, so I could be wrong here, but it wouldn't shock me if that's one of the questions, like, hey, so it seems like the fan base is getting a little restless right now because your competition has made a lot of announcements while you have made next to none. Are there plans coming soon? Because this could perhaps impact momentum. I think if it becomes something like that where it does look like it could potentially impact long-term sales, then Nintendo will be like, all right, don't worry, something's coming soon. But
do we know how big this investors meeting are? Because I know they have some.
Well, they just
they have meetings all the time, but they have like big meetings. Like
they had their annual one like a few months ago, so I think that this one is not, as far as they go, like it's not.
I think they do like quarterly ones that are really big.
Like
and
that's what this is.
And they're normally really large. I think several hundred investors are usually attending. In the last couple, the numbers I've seen have been half that. So I do know that they're while the messaging still gets out to all of their investors, they're only actually addressing a smaller group of people than they're used to. I don't really know if that would necessarily impact what the messaging would be. The messaging would probably be what it is just regardless, but the nature of COVID and things going on in a slower year, they've been addressing a smaller direct group of people.
My point is, like, it's not impossible. You said it was on the 6th, right?
Yes.
That would be a Thursday. So it's not impossible that week they have a Nintendo Direct.
I
would
think
be like,
that makes
what,
sense,
3 weeks
actually.
after their...
I don't know.
After the last one? I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's, like, super likely. I'm not saying, like, oh, guys, the 5th, like...
I think I wonder,
but...
I think that we all fall into the trap of trying to line things up in a way that really is not how things usually happen. And so, I mean, obviously we talked about Nintendo having a Direct next month, and so I still think there's a good chance, and it sounds like we all probably do. And yes, maybe they would do it this Thursday, the 6th, just because there's an investors meeting, but I think that's more of just the fan effect of like, oh, Nintendo's doing a thing on this Thursday, so wouldn't they do more things on this Thursday, like the one that we want? And
Question for you guys. So, if we don't get a Direct like this week, I think that kind of spells, I don't want to use the word doom, but it suggests that there isn't really a game coming in August. Like, if there's no Direct next week, like there's not gonna be any significant retail release in August.
Probably not anything super huge in September either.
I'm not expecting anything. Well, I think September could be on the table though. Depending.
September, I think
September,
like third-party releases like Bravely Default might come out or something, or like No More Heroes 3.
I'm still holding out for September being the Mario.
I just don't
remasters.
think Nintendo well, maybe the remasters. See, just because they're not new games, that might be good enough. But
I will say, with the Mario stuff though, Odyssey came out in October, so maybe they'd want to do that and put those Mario remasters out.
Could be they could hold it for then, but there's also not going to be a major retail Pokemon release this year. So I think they're going to want to have something for November, and maybe it's the Mario remasters, but again, they're remasters. I think the Mario remasters are great, but I think they need like a 1-2 punch here. So which is why I, early in the year I was thinking, okay, it's going to be Zelda and something else, but ideally I think Zelda and Mario remasters would be like a great 1-2 punch, but again, I totally understand that that's becoming increasingly less likely. So maybe it
also depends on like how ambitious this remaster collection is. Like, is Mario 64 going to be remastered? Is it going to be remade? Are the other games going to be remastered or remade? We don't know. Like,
all question and mystery. I will say, with a 1-2 punch, if I was to design the perfect 1-2 punch in 2020 based on things that we know about,
right?
And to be Mario remasters, we don't know about them, but I'm going to include that anyway. I think it would be the Mario remasters and Bayonetta 3. Because you get something first party that, even though they're old games, those are going to be huge. Those things will sell. It does not matter. They're going to sell like crazy. So
especially during these times.
100%. They will sell like crazy. So the Mario remasters becomes your great first party representation. Not a whole lot of money invested into them. We're just remastering games we've already made before and releasing them in a package. Here you go. And then Bayonetta 3 is one of the higher profile and more exciting third-party games. It's already of a notable series. It kind of represents and caters to that slightly older audience. So they cover the third-party and older audience in that same one fell swoop. So if there was a 1-2 punch that we're guessing on, that seems to make the most sense to me.
I think that'd be
true.
solid.
You satisfy first-party fans, you satisfy third-party fans, you satisfy the more light-hearted, more cartoony game fans, and you satisfy the more mature fan base. So you kind of satisfy everybody in a way.
Also, just a reminder, throw it out there, we're still waiting on a date for Doom Eternal on the Switch.
True.
So that can also pop in still this year, hopefully.
Yep. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, only time will really tell. Like, we can go on sort of like speculating, when will that be? I think they can definitely not have a game in August. I'll tell. This is what I think. I think if we don't get any announcement this week, there will not be a major game for August. Like maybe they shadow drop some sort of smaller project through the eShop, but I don't think there's going to be any major release. And that's it. I'm hoping maybe we get like a Pikmin 3 Deluxe trailer next week, and it comes out at the end of August. But that's probably at this point, I feel like it's like a best case scenario for August. And then September, I think there's going to be a game. I just don't see Nintendo going 2 months without something. So even if they don't have a direct soon, there's going to be some sort of announcement for at least a September game.
I tend to think that August might already be off the table. To be fair, like
that could be the case. Yeah,
I just kind of feel like August, as far as releasing a game, like showing a direct is one thing. Releasing a game, I think it's off the table. But you know, it's not crazy to think that one way Nintendo could salvage the rest of the year is by releasing one game in September, one in October, and one in November. And that could be something like, I don't know, like Pikmin 3 would be the September game, and then Bayonetta in October, and then the Mario remasters in November, something like that.
And then Zelda in December? Oh, sorry.
Sure. I definitely don't think they would ever put Zelda in December.
Well, what about Metroid, though?
Well, I mean, God, oh man, I don't even know what to say. I mean,
I'll just
obviously,
so maybe not Metroid, but I see a game come. I can see it happening because it didn't happen last year, but in 2017 we got Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in December, and then in 2018 we got Smash Ultimate, and that was the biggest game of the year.
That's true with Smash. You know, that's a really good point because of how big Smash is. So I don't know if I see them doing that with Zelda, but.
Probably not Zelda. I think if we get past November and it's not Zelda, I think the next best time is March, and if not then maybe the game is not going to be it's not going to be around until like the holidays. But
I think it's holidays next year.
Yeah.
If I was to put money on it, that would be my guess for sure.
Yeah.
Metroid is, you know, surprisingly we haven't talked about Metroid this whole time.
We're gonna.
And I do think it's okay, well, I do think it's worth noting that, you know, the inevitability of the Prime trilogy is always on the table. It has been for years. Technically still is. And then there's the 2D Metroid rumor situation, which I do tend to believe in. And so maybe that's something that they do squeeze in for this year. I mean, for so long, I wanted to believe it was going to show up in this year, even after the pandemic started. And so,
I think that a 2D Metroid or a Prime Trilogy are definitely games that aren't, you know, like they're the fanboys are, sorry, that's not the word I was looking for. You know, fans of Nintendo, I don't know why my brain is not working. There we go. Hardcore, that's the word I was looking for. I don't know, my brain just like had a brain fart there for a second. But hardcore fans would definitely be like, it's a big deal for them. But as far as like how major release it is, it's not that major. So it's not off the table that they could announce either one of those games and have it come out this year and have plenty of time to market it perfectly fine for the caliber of games they are.
I think, I mean, you're right in the sense that Metroid, obviously, while it's still like high tier, it is definitely more niche of the high tier, which is like a weird combination of both. Like, I'm a Metroid fan, but I can admit the truth of that. However, I do think that, especially this year, a Prime trilogy or a new 2D Metroid would probably still end up doing pretty well, and I think Nintendo would just promote the hell out of it. And if you think about it, the long-running conversation about the Prime trilogy is that, it's probably been done for a while, and Nintendo's been sitting on it, and they had to delay that alongside of their choice to delay Metroid Prime 4. So let's just say that that's true. There's been lots of talks, you know, publicly and privately about that. Let's say that that's true, and they're just sitting on the Prime trilogy. If they're sitting on a Prime trilogy, there's never been a better time to just let that thing out into the wild.
Yeah,
do so well.
Exactly. Especially like how they've done, you know, dealt with other trilogies or like packaged like games where they have already announced a sequel, like Bayonetta 3. Like Bayonetta 1 and 2 came to the Switch so long ago, and we haven't even seen Bayonetta 3. So it's not like some people are saying that like Nintendo like has to have it like the same year, like it's gonna come out early in the year, and then Prime 4 is gonna come out late that same year. And I'm just like, why? They've never done that with any of their other games. They don't do that.
So before we close out, like, because I know I want to talk about the Metroid movie stuff a little, like that. I want to get into that for a little bit, and we can close out with that. There's something I want to bring up to you guys. It's related to what we're talking about now. I made a video on it earlier this week. Basically, I'll just put it up here. There we go. So there was a. Are you guys familiar with C. Tsubasa from Reset Era?
I'm not, to be
A little
honest.
bit, yeah.
So C. Tsubasa is one of the insiders or credible leakers that people listen to on Reset Era. And for example, last year he pointed out several things that were announced during the March Nintendo Direct, including Link's Awakening.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, he used to go by King Zell, but that was like.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But his name is C.
okay.
Tsubasa, and he had a friend. Point is, he goes by C. Tsubasa now, but people know him as King Zell. So before bleeding is because this is from July 18th, so at that time we thought, oh, there's a Nintendo Direct coming really soon, and it sort of was. But he said, I hope you guys like Mario games. I have it here on the pod, so people can see on the stream. But he had bolded both the M in Mario and the S in games. And people were like, oh, is he teasing something? Is he suggesting something? And he was, because, let me see if I can pull it up here for people to see. Yeah, there it is. So he was questioned on this. Is like, so was this a hint about Mario games that wasn't for this? I didn't read that correctly. So the hint about Mario games wasn't for this. And he responded, what I was told, this is after the partner showcase came out. This is what he said. What I was told that Nintendo is showcasing their games late summer. So here he's saying, hey, from what I heard, this Direct isn't what I was told was going to be happening. And then he goes on to say, that's why this Direct was a surprise to me, actually. The S and M hint were for 2 games that should have been revealed in that Nintendo Direct. With Nintendo, especially this year, nothing is certain. So the way I interpreted that was it was almost like he was referring to games that weren't for Mario, like other potential Nintendo announcements. Now, S could maybe mean Splatoon, or it could mean Star Fox, or it could mean Skyward Sword, and maybe M just means Mario, and that's just how he chose to word it, but also maybe it means Metroid. And I think this guy does have legitimate inside information, so when he teases things, I think it's real. It's just really a matter of, will Nintendo release it, and when will Nintendo announce it? So I think he is teasing other game announcements from Nintendo that we'll see this year. Will they come out this year? I don't know, but I think when we do eventually get the announcements from Nintendo, we will see what he was alluding to. So M&S, what could they be?
Sonic and Metroid at the Olympic Games.
Got it. That's it. That's it.
I actually think they officially announced they're not doing those anymore.
Really?
Yeah, they probably don't. I mean, the only thing I'll say is like, this is tricky because I think it's one of those things where, and this has nothing really to do with him, and I'm not even trying to discredit him. I'm just not. But I do think it's worth pointing out that anyone can say at any time without any actual details that Nintendo's making this video game. And it's like, we know that. There's been cryptic things about like, oh, I hope you like casual games, which was apparently supposed to be a tease for like Animal Crossing or something. And it's like, that is so vague. There's no insinuation that you have any information that's talking about a specific title.
Have you met Animal Crossing fans? They're anything but casual.
Yeah, well, okay, that is true. And so I just want to, I think it's tricky with stuff like this because, I mean, I could just say anything. I could be like, Nintendo's working on a game that's got characters, and it's like, well, what?
You're not wrong.
Rob,
yeah,
it's like I'm not wrong, but I'm telling you, I don't know a secret when I say that. I'm just saying that because it fits the mold. And so again, I do know that he's got some credibility and some history, so it's really not meant to be a commentary on him exactly.
But
I
for
just
sure,
think
we should
that,
take it with a grain of salt.
Absolutely, because it's nothing until it's real. No one has a track record.
Right. You should take anybody with a grain of salt simply because people put out fake leaks. Like Nintendo themselves might put out a fake leak to throw people off the scent. You might hear about something and be confused as, the messaging maybe didn't come across right. Or you just saw a glimpse of something, you didn't see the whole picture. Or things just changed since last you heard of it.
I also have a major conspiracy brain in this territory because I also think that planned leaks happen a lot. And I think that's also in movies. I think in the gaming industry and in the movie industry, I firmly
2401.
Yeah, exactly. It turns out they were planning 24 in 1 month.
There you go.
Maybe not that, but maybe they leaked the source code.
Oh, that Nintendo leaked the source code? Maybe?
I doubt it because it's source code, but
why would they wouldn't do? There's no way. But I just think, I think some companies might plan stuff to get hype going in a certain way, or they know how to they're smart companies in all of these entertainment mediums. They know how to milk us for all that we're worth as far as free marketing. You know, we generate revenue for them when we get excited and start talking about Nintendo Direct leaks and 2D Metroid stuff. And it just keeps, there's honestly, if you think about it, because of all of us, you know, both fans and us in the YouTube community, there's honestly more hype and attention focused on Metroid right now than there has been in years. And Nintendo hasn't done anything other than can't delay a game. And so in the midst of it, that's all they've done. And we talk about it. And again, I am firmly guilty because that's my passion and that's what I do on my YouTube channel. And I don't mind doing it, but it's just, that's what happens. And so why wouldn't these companies want to take advantage of that? So that could be what's happening too, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I am 100% certain that's why they called it a direct mini show, partner showcase, just because they wanted people to talk about it. They wanted the name Direct attached to it because the instant that is, everybody on the internet's all over it. Yeah. If they had announced that they were going to have a partner showcase for 8 minutes, nobody would have cared. If that's what they called it, nobody would have given a crap. Nobody would have watched.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys another question. It just came up. Rob, I know you're a huge fan of this series, No More Heroes. The way Suda51 is sort of like teased this game, I feel like we've been led to believe that 2020 date that was assigned to No More Heroes is still holding. I just feel like it'd be weird for him to tease it in the way he has a few times. So I feel like No More Heroes is probably still coming, but
we haven't heard anything on it about delays or anything. So,
but is
every
it coming?
Time it's
is
brought
my
up,
question to you guys. Do you guys think we're still getting it this year?
Every time it's brought up with confidence and absolutely no disclaimer that it would not come out this year. Which I feel like even if they thought that maybe it was going to delay, they might say something. They're not saying anything on it, and I feel like, you know, it's pretty late in the year. I feel like by now, if the game wasn't going to make 2020, you should know, pretty much.
I actually am skeptical for it releasing in 2020. I like your guys' optimism, and I want you to be right, because I really want that game. I just feel like that is a game, considering we've had blatant teases from Suda several times this year, and considering how slow and quiet Nintendo has been otherwise, I feel like that's a game that if it was on track, we probably would have already heard about it. It kind of falls into the Bayonetta camp. It's like the longer we go without hearing about it, the more I fear that it's delayed. And with this game specifically, because of the teases of Suda, that tells me that he might be trying to get something out about this game simply because Nintendo isn't, or simply because he knows a delay of a 2020 release date is coming. And because if he's going to show anything, like if he's going to show anything, why wouldn't he just show the game? What's the purpose of showing the game with his face in front of it? You know, yes, it's a troll, and I get that that's his humor, and I love Suda for that stuff. I actually thought that was really funny and clever. But it also, to me, told me the opposite. I think some people, you know, it makes sense to see that and take away from it that, oh, the game must be almost ready. I actually personally, though, took away the opposite. Because I feel like what's the point of the joke of teasing us with it? If it's coming out in 2020, it's at maximum 5 months away.
I might agree with that if we have seen literally anything for the second half of this month. If we knew any games, like if we knew when Bravely Default was launching,
that's a whole other thing.
Like that.
Also slated
like
for this
we
year.
don't know anything, so I don't think I don't really agree with that sentiment that, you know, they should have announced it by now, just because they haven't announced anything. It's like, yeah, they should have announced things by now, but they haven't announced anything. So, in my opinion, I feel like maybe that's just the most, like, he wants to announce it, but he's like, okay, Nintendo, you're gonna have a thing, you know, in August. So I'll wait, but I'm gonna tease the game.
I like the optimism, and I don't think it's crazy. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer right now, because all any of us can do yes and just take a little bit of information we have and formulate what makes the most sense.
Exactly.
To me, all three of these games, No More Heroes, Bravely Default, and Bayonetta, absolutely still have the chance to be confirmed for 2020, 100%. I mean, maybe all three of them do, and that'll be amazing. But I also think the longer we go without hearing about any of them, that not just No More Heroes could be delayed. Maybe all three of those are also delayed. Maybe that's part of Nintendo struggling in 2020, is that these games can't make it out this year. So That's more where my line is.
There is a possibility of that for sure, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, all of these games could be delayed. Like as Nintendo has said, like with the pandemic, it's all up in the air, right? So we really don't know. Yeah. I'll also say though that if all these games are delayed, 2021 should be the best year yet.
Right.
But we probably said that for previous years as well. So I was going into 2020 thinking this year was going to be killer.
And maybe it was supposed to be. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's the thing, man. So if 2020 was supposed to be killer and it continually, every month, 7 times this year, we've been let down, that just shows me that there's more of a chance that these games just might be delayed, you know? And I'm not trying to be the pessimist. I mean, I just made a video about how I think there might still be a plan to save 2020. But there's just as much a part of me that wonders if it's just not happening. I mean, earlier in the year, I made conversations talking about Nintendo possibly giving up on 2020, about Nintendo possibly making the choice because of the pandemic to just allow Microsoft and Sony all the runway they need to release their consoles uncontested from Nintendo. People thought it was kind of a joke, ridiculous thing at the time, but it makes more and more sense the longer we go. The day that Nintendo does give us a big Nintendo Direct, if that happens, all that stuff is out the window. We've got everything we need and everything feels great. But every day we go without that Direct means maybe that is what Nintendo's doing, you know?
I mean, so technically, for me, it's not that much different if they have like a bad year versus if they just completely give up as far as like how much attention is going to be on Sony and Microsoft, because no matter what, they're going to have attention. Like, that's just a fact. So really, if you're not going to have something super huge like Breath of the Wild sequel to deter from that, you're not really making a dent in that hype. It's not gonna happen. So
the only thing they'd have, you know, or a Mario Kart.
It might be worth it for them to be, you know what? It doesn't matter what we release. We're gonna get overshadowed by Sony Microsoft's launch. You know, if we have a really killer 2021, we can slow the momentum down after that. Because it's not like people buy game like consoles don't sell ridiculously well at launch compared to like later on, because the stock is so limited, and especially now the stock's gonna be real limited. So you get like a few million and that's about it, and you have this tiny install base, so it's not like
I just had a brain blast.
It would murder Nintendo to let them have this launch.
Brain blast. Okay, so, and this is actually, I should give Master D some credit here, because Master D said this year feels like 2015, 2016. So hear me out. First, I want to say this part, and then I'll get to the brain blast part. So first, I'll make a prediction to say that we're getting at least 2 fairly significant Nintendo games this year. We got Animal Crossing in March, Xenoblade Chronicles in May, Paper Mario in July, I think something in September, something in November, and that's it. Hopefully a couple other little things to fill in, but that's kind of like my minimum like expectation. Then for 2021, this is where I bring where what Master D said kind of makes sense, because this year feels like a little bit of a slow year, right? Like that last year of Wii U, like the year before Switch came out, it was just like dead.
I don't know if it's that bad. It's definitely not that bad.
Compared to other Switch years, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's not like the last year, because the last year of a console is horrible.
No. This is not the last year.
It's not that bad.
But it might be like, it is like a midway point, and we might see like a second wind for like that second half push. And I think in 2021 could be setting us up to be pretty big, because remember how, if we go back about a couple years from this point, we got a firmware update that told us there were going to be 2 other Switch models in the firmware when it was data mined. So at the time there was 3, and a year and a half later we got the Switch Lite and the Switch version 2.0 or something, right? But more recently we got a data mine showing 2 more. So I'm of the frame of mind that next year there will be some sort of at least one new Switch revision. I don't know what's going to be exactly. Maybe Switch Pro, Switch VR, or just something along those lines. There's going to be another Switch, and I think they're going to have a couple major releases to launch alongside of it. It's going to be kind of like a repush, not a Switch 2, like not the next gen Switch, but like another upgrade to kind of function alongside base Switch and Switch Lite. And 2021 could be kind of like a launch for that year. They'll have a couple games to push that. Maybe Breath of the Wild 2 on a Switch Pro. Maybe we finally get some reveal trailers. Maybe it doesn't come out next year, but at least we start seeing footage of it. And it's just kind of like a really big, exciting year. I can kind of see that happening, especially with the way this year has been going. Like, maybe this year was always meant to be kind of slow because it was a slowdown in preparation for the big hardware launch next year in 2021. They have Zelda and something else really big, and because of the pandemic, that in conjunction with them maybe slowing things down for this year so they can be strong for next year, that's why things seem so bad right now. Because I feel like the pandemic alone doesn't seem to explain all of the delays right now. So I don't know. They to me, it's kind of starting to kind of make sense that maybe right now it's just kind of more of a calm before the storm, and next year is going to be a pretty good year.
It is interesting because as much as we think Nintendo should, or it might be in Nintendo's best interest to do something to deter from the PS5 and Xbox Series X launch. Another strategy could be like that's kind of a lost hope. Console launches are going to sell no matter what, but it's typical that software for new consoles is sort of dry for a bit. So if you attack at that time in 2021, then you will, I think there's a much better chance of you like completely dominating the competition in a way. Because a lot of their huge games aren't going to be coming out for another couple of years. Like Sony has Spider-Man for this holiday, and they have other great games like Ratchet and Clank, but we don't know when that's going to come out. We don't know when the new Gran Turismo is coming out. We don't know when the new Forza is coming out. We don't know when Fable's coming out. Like, those could be years from now. So if you attack them when software's slower, which is typically, like the first year of your system, unless you're the Switch, which apparently first year system is just mind-blowingly amazing.
Yeah, but that year before was really slow. I think they held that game so they could have a really strong launch.
Right. Typically, consoles don't launch with a ton of great games.
Yeah. I think that you're 100% right that is the right time to attack. I think that there is a really good chance because, the Xbox and PlayStation are each going to launch with one really good killer app. We're getting Halo and Spider-Man. So that's going to be the one main game to play on those consoles. And you're right. For the first year or two, usually not a whole lot for those new systems. And I do think that Nintendo's 2021 is obviously shaping up to be really amazing. The question, like kind of per the viewer and then also the brain blast that you had, Andres, is like, is 2021 going to be amazing by circumstance or because it was always planned by Nintendo? And I think that there could be something to it. I don't know if it doesn't feel the same to me as like a last year of the Wii U thing, because that was definitely a year that was bad by circumstance because the Wii U wasn't doing well and Nintendo was moving on. And so they were purposely trying to, wane out of that generation and build up the next one. And Nintendo planned that so much more carefully. It's tough for me to see that they would have been willing to sacrifice this year on purpose for the sake of next year.
So, to clarify my point, I'm not saying that I think Nintendo intentionally held back games, but maybe they would have saved a couple really big releases for this year and have a couple smaller. Like, they still have a game to come out for this year. Like, they wouldn't just leave it dead. Sure. But maybe say, for example, if it's between like Breath of the Wild 2 and the Mario remasters, you have the Mario remasters come out this year, especially with the 35th anniversary, and then next year, if you have like a Switch Pro, Breath of the Wild 2 is like a really good launch game for that with that system.
Totally. And I think that if we're talking about them adapting in 2020 and changing the plan for 2020 to say, let's just make 2021 the killer year, which also has the positive byproduct of combating the PS5 and Xbox Series X, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I think that probably is what's happened, for the most part. And so even bearing in mind that still might mean that they decide to get out a couple of games this year, like these Mario remasters, if they're real, or a Pikmin 4, if that exists, and they leave all the other big stuff for 2021. The other Switch model thing, I just don't know how I feel about that anymore. And I don't know if I can be quite as confident. And I know you're just theorizing anyway, to be fair, but I don't know if I'm super confident in them doing that next year, because I think that maybe before next-gen consoles would launch, the Switch Pro would have been a great thing to make, or an upgraded Switch. But after those consoles come out, I think that releasing hardware like that, unless it's a significant change to the Switch, to the point that it changes the library of the console, I don't know if it's worth the marketing and the R&D and the manufacturing in lieu of an Xbox Series X and a PlayStation 5. Like, a Switch Pro could be great competition for an Xbox One X and a PS4 Pro, but I don't know about a PS5 and a Series X. I don't know what dent it's going to make in the abilities of the console or the library of the game. So I wonder if it makes sense for them to not do the Switch Pro and just wait another year or two beyond to move on to their next gen machine.
Well,
is kind of what I think.
My thinking is that, like, I think you have a point, because a Switch Pro is not gonna really like overpower a PS5 or a Series X. There's just no way. There's no way that's gonna happen.
I don't know what it would invigorate. I just don't know what it would be doing in 2021. You know,
Right.
But
that's my thing.
My thing is my thinking is that I understand what you're saying, and I would say that I don't really know what they're gonna do. I feel like, because I kind of agree with that Switch Pro doesn't necessarily like change too much. Like, how much demand is there really for a Switch Pro? I'm not sure, but I also acknowledge that Nintendo does some really weird, really cool and creative things. Look at what they did with Ring Fit Adventure. Look what they did with Nintendo Labo.
Yeah.
And I just see that data mine that has the other two Switch models, and that there's a history where last time we saw that we got 2 other Switch revisions. And considering how Nintendo's handling this system and how they handled their handheld systems, how they had several revisions even when they didn't seem to make sense.
I will say that the 2DS falls into that category.
Right.
To your point, the 2DS is a big point to that theory.
So
yeah, the 2DS wasn't like a Pro. It was more like just like.
I thought it was the weirdest thing that they did,
So
especially at the time they did. But go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, it might not be a Switch Pro. It might be something that's more of like a lateral move, right? Like just like another thing to the Switch family.
I'm hoping
like Switch
it
VR,
will be
maybe.
some kind of VR thing, because the patents or was it patents? Or I think the data mine is
right. It suggests a second screen.
It suggests 2 screens.
Which is what you need for VR.
Right. It would make sense for them to do it. And the chips, to be honest, the chips that were data mined are not even close to powerful enough to be a Switch Pro. They're really not. They're just modified versions of the same chip that's in the Switch revision, the better battery life one, which makes
what
sense.
would the
I mean, if
chances
you want
be...
VR, you're going to have a lot better battery life with that in a dedicated unit.
What would the chances be that it's something like a special edition model, and that's all it's supposed to be? Here's the Breath of the Wild 2 model, something like that. That's got, it's got its own SKU.
Because it would have its own, it wouldn't have its own dedicated chipset for that. It would just use the same
So is it a unique chipset that has
it's
different
a unique chipset that's modified
Okay.
differently than the other ones.
All right, well, then who knows? Yeah, very interesting.
But I don't think either of them look like Switch Pro material.
Yeah, they don't quantify Switch Pro power is what it sounds like.
No. And
the lateral thing makes sense then, Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think it's also worth noting that even though maybe like our speculation of what that is all on the point, that doesn't mean it has to come out, right? Like it's preliminary support for something that isn't announced yet. And I think that's an important thing to note with like speculation and rumors. Like, even if we're like on the money about something being real and being in the works until it's officially announced, it's not finalized, it may not happen. So that's something we should also consider. I also
that goes back.
I was just gonna say I like the point you brought up earlier, how like maybe Nintendo didn't have a plan to make 2020 the big year, but they were fluid in their thinking. Like they may be fluid. Like they kind of have to sort of wait and see how things play out, and their plans for what they want to have come out can change. But go on with what you're about to say.
I think that I was going to bring up the point of maybe part of the fluidity was that the Switch Pro could have been something planned for this year. And maybe that's part of what they realize. I mean, you want to talk about trying to make Nintendo Directs and video games in 2020 has been hard for Nintendo. I'm sure making a new console like a Switch Pro would have been even harder.
Oh yeah,
and so maybe that's
trying
something
to manufacture normal Switches more.
Totally. Yes, exactly. And so maybe one of the big things that could have organically shifted and changed in 2020 was the Switch Pro. And just like to your point you were making, Andres, maybe that's one of the things that didn't move from 2020 to 2021. Maybe they scrapped it. Maybe there was just going to be a Switch Pro in 2020. And they're like, you know what? We can't do a new console in 2020, and it's going to make less sense next year. Let's stop now and save all the money on R&D and manufacturing and just not do it.
I do actually kind of see your point, especially because if they release a Switch Pro, there's a lot of controversy around whether or not a Switch Pro would have exclusive games like the new 3DS, and I think that failed, like completely flopped. Like the new 3DS, its exclusive games didn't do well, they didn't sell well, nobody wanted to make them. So there's like 3 of them, and that's it. I think maybe Nintendo looked at this and they're like, you know what? the cross-gen for Xbox One, they like the original base models of the Xbox One, the Xbox Series X. That's gonna last a year or two. They already have announced that there's gonna be versions of those games where you can make a Switch version of that. But
100%.
maybe they're like, okay, now we'll plan for that second or third year when they start doing more exclusives. We'll launch a new machine that can actually run those games. That way, we're getting those new third-party games, but we're not also like screwing over fans who have the base model, because this is an entirely new Switch 2, not a Switch Pro.
Yep. Yeah, I've been kind of theorizing something similar for so long. I know the Switch Pro rumors were out there, and I know even people I know have believed it for so long behind the scenes.
I have.
And it's like, I mean, and it's exciting. Here's the thing: I don't need a Switch Pro, but if they made one, would I buy it? Yes, I would. So like, of course, it's like it could be exciting, but it just has not made sense to me for a very long time. And so my thinking has been, because there's also been different schools of thought for how long the Switch is even going to exist. Oh my God, Kamiya said something about, the Switch is going to last 10 years. And I'm like, is it really though? But some people still believe it.
Well, I mean,
and
10 years, like it could be like a PS1, PS2 10 years where the PS3 is already out and it's just like on shelves.
Yeah, and that's true. But that's different than, 10 years. I think that what we think of though, because I think you could be right, but what we all think of is 10 years as the front-facing hardware for Nintendo. And there's just no way.
It's gonna be more than like 5 or 6. I
Same
think the
here.
hardware is just not. It's not there. I think the concept is there, but that was hardware that was already old when the Switch launched, and it's. I mean, even the Switch isn't even as powerful as the base Xbox One. We're already 2 generations ahead of that. Like, they can't keep that hardware going forever, bro.
With new hardware coming out, it just means they have to fast track the
sense.
next generation even faster. And so a stopgap Switch Pro has just not made sense to me pretty much almost since its inception. Like, I will admit, there was a time where I was starting to believe it. Like, after the Switch Lite was revealed, I was like, dude, maybe there is going to be a Switch Pro. But I still disagreed with the decision to do it. And so
I think
part of the reason is
because
this year was probably the year. And so if they're not going to do it, it's because they need to just move on to the next gen sooner than later.
Right. And maybe
Switch
it was
is really
planned,
successful.
but those plans changed.
They changed,
Right.
So
I want to present you guys an idea. Okay, so like maybe you guys are spot on here, and there won't be a Switch Pro because it just doesn't make sense. Maybe that's the case, but maybe there is still like a lateral Switch revision next year, and then 2 years down the road, that's when we see the next generation Switch. And that would sort of line up with when the other consoles, they move away from the cross-gen games and they just start focusing on their platform. So Nintendo would be kind of back on track in terms of when the generation is. So what if they do that, but they still keep the other Switch on the market, and it becomes kind of like that 3DS, 2DS situation where like the 3DS came out in 2010. It went on for
2011.
Was it? You're right.
2011. Yeah.
Because the Wii U came out in 2011.
12.
12. Wii U came out 2012.
Right, because Skyward. You're right. You're right. Skyward Sword came out in 2011.
I mean, it's only 1 year difference though. Like, we're only off by 1 year. So.
That's
2011 for 3DS.
Yeah. So February
2012.
February 26, 2011 is when the 3DS came out. So early 2011, and then when was it like truly phased out entirely? Like there were still games coming out
last year, maybe. I mean,
yeah. So it went on for a pretty ridiculous amount of time, and that hardware was it did not age well.
I think the last big game came out in late 2018, early 2019, maybe for the 3DS.
Like Ever Oasis was one of the last new games they made for it.
There was that Mario and Luigi game that was like one of the last ones.
Yeah, the remake of or the remaster of Bowser's Inside Story, I believe.
Yeah, and then they released Kirby's Epic Yarn.
Oh yeah, I forgot why did they do that?
I think
the original
I love that.
Luigi's
Why
Mansion.
did they do that? Yeah, I mean, I love Kirby's Epic Yarn, but it was very weird. I actually think that game was announced in the last Nintendo Direct to ever feature 3DS games, which I think was early 2018, I think. So
yeah, they didn't even do directs. Like they had some stuff, but they didn't even do directs past early 2018 for 3DS. Yeah. They didn't even have segments for it.
But I think I see, Andres, where you're trying to go, though. Like, how long could the Switch continue to exist alongside of their next machine the same way the 3DS did? Is that your thinking?
Partially. So,
okay.
Yeah, what if they do that, where they let it go on for a few more years, and maybe it should, right? Because we agree that hardware isn't going to age well. But what if Nintendo's in a situation where they release their next system, and similar to the competition, Sony and Microsoft, how they have like cross-gen games, what if they do something even crazier where their first-party games work on both systems?
100%, I do not want this.
But,
I will tell you straight up right now, I don't.
He just shot you down right away.
Hold on a second. I get it, and I'm not saying I think it's super likely, but I want to talk about the idea for a little bit, because if you look at the way the Switch works right now, it already has two different like graphical settings, like the game sort of transition. You know, the game, Nintendo develops all their games to work in portable mode and docked mode. Like, what if they have a scenario where they have the more powerful Switch and that is like the next generation system, but their first party games kind of work on both sides because they're already developing games with multiple graphical settings in mind already.
I mean, I would say it falls under the umbrella of what Microsoft is trying to do with smart delivery, kind of. It's like a reverse smart delivery, right? Where a game that's a Nintendo game designed for the Switch 2 could also be backwardsly slightly downgraded to work in the original Switch hardware. Is that what it is?
Basically, yeah.
Is that
yeah, yep.
It falls in that category, and it falls in the same category of when the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X were coming out, and they were like, developers will be able to make modes for this game that, Gears 5 on the Xbox One is this way, but if you put it into your Xbox One X, there will be like an enhanced mode or something you're supposed to select. I don't even know if that actually ended up happening, but it was something they were talking about before the One X came out. And so I don't know if I believe the idea, but because I think it falls in the same category as the kind of stuff that Sony and Microsoft have done, only in the opposite direction,
right,
it's interesting, and I don't think it's super crazy.
But to counter my own idea, right? It's very pro-consumer, and I love Nintendo, but I wouldn't define them as pro-consumer.
I don't want this. It's not consumer friendly for me personally. It's not brand friendly. It's not brand. Yes, it's not brand friendly. Yeah. I'm gonna buy this new console, and
you don't want
it's
games
just
held
so much
back.
more. I don't want games being held back because it makes sense for like the beginnings of the Series X, because the Xbox, even the base Xbox One, is a competent machine these days. It has enough power to where, the games don't look as good, but you really only have to sacrifice mostly just resolution, maybe frame rate, a little bit of grass here and there. It looks basically the same game, just a little bit worse. Whereas, like, on the Switch, you're going to have the game that looks how it's supposed to, and this game that looks terrible, and I don't, need them to waste time on that.
Could the next Switch be backwards compatible, though?
Yes, 100%.
I think there's a good chance, If they
simply
decided...
because it uses such,
They're not going back to discs.
Well, yeah, they're not going back to discs,
Doubtful.
but it uses such similar architecture to, PCs, everything, moving forward. It's not like back in the day where everything was exclusive, built specifically for this machine. Like, the Switch is just using aftermarket parts that are used in the Shield that, they're not custom.
Yeah, I've had a thought for so long. I mean, when I say so long, probably 2 years, and I've never really voiced it. That kind of is building off of that point, and it's going to sound crazy because of how popular the Switch is and how much we all love it. But I honestly wonder if the Switch was almost designed as an interim stepping stone console. And to the point where, you talk about the aftermarket parts that they're using, and yes, it's amazing it can achieve a game like a Doom or a Witcher, which are game changers for the hardware. But at the same time, it's so limited in other spaces. And because of the time that it released, Nintendo knew that they were releasing it earlier than they meant to because they were killing the Wii U so quickly. Also, Nintendo was smart enough to know if we release our new handheld console Switch thing in 2017, we know the other two guys are not too far behind with their next gen machines that we will then no longer be able to keep up with. And I seriously just wonder if the Switch was always intended to be a 4 to 5 year life cycle machine, fairly cheap to make. Yeah, fairly cheap to make, and not intending to really stick with it for too terribly long, so that they've also had this secret bunker underneath Nintendo's headquarters, where there's been guys the whole time working on the next super badass thing. that can actually become competent competition for PS5 and Xbox Series X. Not to the point where I think they're going to have more power. I think Nintendo's probably always going to be a little bit of a step below. But maybe that's what the Switch was meant for. Ballpark, absolutely.
I mean, it's a handheld,
yeah.
so it's never going to be as powerful. But I do think it can have the same feature set, and I think it can be
PS2
similar
to Xbox or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of leaks and rumors about Microsoft, their codename and Econo Machine, which is a Series X but with a weaker graphics card.
The
so it
Series
still has the
S.
same, yeah, the Series S. I think in that terms, that's kind of the spec I think Nintendo could target, simply because obviously it's a mobile system. They're never gonna get a mobile system, even if it comes out 3 years from now. It's not gonna be as powerful as Series X. It just can't. But if it has the same features, it does ray tracing, it has a CPU that can keep up with these games, even if it doesn't run as high resolution, at least it runs the game,
Well, that's the thing. I think with the magic of the Switch, and I say this as somebody who doesn't understand this stuff at all, but looking at just what the final products and games have been, the magic of the Switch is that it somehow is able to run a more than competent version of Doom and The Witcher and Mortal Kombat 11 and Doom Eternal upcoming, stuff like that. So clearly the base architecture and approach to building the Switch is magical. So now we take that and add 5 years of tech and advancement, something meant to combat PS5 and Xbox Series X. Really all Nintendo needs to worry about by releasing new hardware is the ability to play the same games. All it needs to do is they need to be able to say when Mortal Kombat 12 or heaven forbid Grand Theft Auto 6, which they probably won't bring, when these games come out to the Series X and the PS5, we want to have just as good of a shot of a version of that running on our console as anyone else.
Without having a dedicated team to put it on there.
Exactly. Without having, exactly. And so that's the motivation with, for people who maybe want to poo-poo on the idea of them moving to a next generation in the next year or two. I've long said the motivation to do that really is the third-party support. Because once PS5 and Series X are hitting their groove, if we're still on the 2017 Nintendo Switch portable hardware, we're not getting any of the games coming to PS5 and Series X. And that will hurt Nintendo's hardware. But if they release something that can play versions of those games, way better situation, I think.
So,
I mean, I've been saying similar to this since the Switch launched and they used the Tegra X1 instead of the Tegra X2, even though it was literally out and for sale, and they probably could have gone in at very similar prices, which is why they're using, actually, fun fact, in the revised version of the Switch, they're using a chipset that's much closer to the X2 than the X1, simply because at this point the X1's actually more expensive to make than the X2, and it's worse. That's where we're going with technology, and mobile technology moves so fast, people already abandoned the tech that's used to make the Switch because it's so old and inefficient. We already have stuff that's so much better, that's cheaper to make, that's kind of why I thought a Switch Pro would come out this year, simply because the tech is there for them to make something that's way better, that's not that much more expensive. So 2 years from now, hell yeah, they could have something that's an absolute beast.
So I just want to a couple things. When you brought up how maybe this could be kind of an interim system, that kind of reminds me of Nintendo's sort of perspective going in with the Nintendo DS. Because it came out really early into the Game Boy Advance's life cycle. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Game Boy Advance came out like 2001?
2000 or 2001.
Right, and then
one of those.
The DS came out holiday 2004, which it's kind of nuts. It was Game Boy Advance basically had 3 years of spotlight.
Game Boy Advance really was just in between, hey guys, we have a new thing before the next actual thing.
But it became a juggernaut.
Yeah, it did really well.
They were saying, oh, this is meant to be like a third pillar, and it turned out to be nope, this is our main pillar.
The old third pillar.
Right. I don't.
Yeah.
I remember when the Switch was going to be a third pillar. The NX was going to be a third pillar.
And I double checked the release for Game Boy Advance. It was March 21, 2001. So it was an early 2001 thing. So it was almost 2000.
Early 2000. Yeah.
So I guess the Game Boy Advance had 3.5 years, or around 3.5 years before the DS. But that's not a long.
That's so short. We're already at that with the Switch.
Right.
I think.
And I can see a scenario where you're right, and maybe the next Switch is meant to come out like not too long, like maybe like a 5-year window, and that's it. It's not meant to be like a 7 or 8 year cycle like like Sony and Microsoft do with their systems. But I also think that even if Nintendo had a plan to maybe do like a traditional console, I don't think that's gonna happen. Like I think where they're at now, that's what works. I think if they were to do a traditional console, it wouldn't sell well. It would. I think it just wouldn't really work really well. It had to be mobile.
But to Rob's point earlier, like this is a lot of aftermarket stuff. Like they haven't worked with custom like stuff. Like they're really in with NVIDIA now. Like before it was kind of like, oh, I hope this works. Like this might bomb. This could have been the Wii U 2 for all Nintendo.
This is more like a prototype.
They're not going to invest a ton of money into this to make super custom stuff when they don't even know if this is going to sell.
But now they know.
They know the Switch is going to sell.
So
they can start putting stuff in the
pockets. And they have the deep pockets to work to make and to pay. Yeah, they've got. I mean, they already had money. They were never really hurting in the Wii U years. Like
the 3DS kept them afloat.
Totally, and they're always releasing profitable hardware, and they're making all the money.
Yeah,
on
the Wii U made money.
Yes, it did. Yes.
Not a lot, but it made a profit.
But compared to what it is now, I mean, the Switch. You know, if the Switch was designed to be an interim console, I think it's worked out. You know, twice as well as they were hoping. Which means whatever plans they could have had to make a more competitive console successor, you know, Switch 2, whatever console successor, I think they can now afford to make it that much more competent if they want, and probably still make it profitable. So I just think it could be a game changer, you know, and to me, I've been targeting, my theory has been targeting 2022 for a long time for the next console.
Is Prime 4 going to be a cross-gen release?
I would not be surprised.
I'm saying, man.
Is Prime 4 the Breath of the Wild for next generation?
Yes. Yes, it is. I was calling that as soon as the game was delayed. I know I made a video within probably weeks or months where I was like, hey, maybe this is going to happen. Or I brought it up in a live stream or something.
Yeah, I know I brought it up in podcasts. I don't think I ever made a video, but I brought it up as a thing in podcast simply because I mean, I've agreed with you for a long time that either we're getting a Switch Pro that's going to be like replace the Switch essentially, like a Switch revision that's meant to replace the Switch, or it was going to be like a 5-year life cycle and we're going to get another Switch. Because since the launch, there's a lot of decisions that they've made that are just like, why would you do that if you're not being like, they're being extremely cautious in the beginning.
Yeah,
about, like,
and
you know, design philosophy.
There are a lot of arguments I see out there that are kind of poking holes in Nintendo's overall first-party releases on the Switch, which initially might sound crazy because we all think of like, oh, well, they made an amazing new Zelda and a new Mario and a new Xenoblade in the first year, which is true, and they made a new Smash Brothers, and these are all amazing games and they sold well, but there's also like some of the other tier of Nintendo's franchises in their game development hasn't really been present. Like, why have we waited so long for a Pikmin 4 that was apparently done 5 years ago? Why are they so afraid to bring back a Kid Icarus or an F-Zero? I don't know, so many other things. And like, also like the quirky, unique things that they used to do with things like Geist and weird things on the GameCube and the Wii. They just did so much quirky stuff. And they haven't been doing that this generation. There are still franchises that don't have any representation. Metroid is in a unique situation, but other than that,
they're trying to get that out there.
Yeah, they're trying. Metroid we would already be playing Metroid if they didn't delay it. Probably, I firmly believe 100%. That. So that was a unique situation. That one gets a pass, but everything else. And I'm like, I've started to listen to some of these arguments, you know, and some of them are from friends of mine who I used to do a podcast and stuff with, and I'm like, you know, I think the Switch has been great, and I've been satisfied with Nintendo's output for the most part, but I am starting to kind of see the argument there that maybe the longer we go, it's like, how much more does Nintendo really plan to do for big first-party games on the Switch? We know they're making Prime 4, we know they're making Breath of the Wild 2, and those are massive releases, but if they really need to move on to the next Switch by something as early as 2022, maybe games like Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 do need to be cross-gen, because maybe the next Mario Kart and the next F-Zero and the next full Mario game and all these other things, Pikmin 4 even, are actually just planned to be next-gen games. and Nintendo's already been planning to move on from the Switch. Like,
and
I don't know. It's kind of made a little bit of sense.
There's another wrinkle to this that I think should be brought up, and that's Pokemon, because it changes kind of everything, right? Because Pokemon used to be on the handhelds, and now it's not. And traditionally, at least, what Pokemon Company has done, or I should say Game Freak, they have their first game that comes out on the system, and that game, that generation, is usually like more like a testing ground, and then that second generation of the system, they really push it to another level. So I really feel like, given just how Game Freak has sort of functioned with their development, they've been very consistent with it, that there's gonna be another generation of Pokemon on the Switch. But at the same time, that doesn't mean there can't be like a next generation system coming out in 2022. Because, for example, with the whatchamacallit, the Black and White, when that came out, the 3DS had come out, I think. The timing was pretty close to each other. Like, they've come out with Pokemon games on the DS, even though the 3DS was already available. Like, we waited a little while to get X and Y. They didn't rush into it just to get it on the next generation system. Like, Game Freak will not rush in if they're working on another piece of hardware there. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean that they won't come out with the system in 2022 because of Pokemon. But something to consider. I think they would want to have Pokemon on the next system as well, especially because now it's not just handheld and home console. It's all one platform.
Right. Another thing that I find interesting is that we're getting a second Zelda game already. Like, typically, when you get a second Zelda game in a single generation, like, they're first, like, it's towards the end of the life cycle of that system, typically. I mean, like, look at Twilight Princess, look at Skyward Sword. Those were all, like, right at the last.
But we launched with Breath of the Wild.
Twilight Princess was...
and the other
but I mean, like, Skyward Sword was kind of like
the entire development. Actually, no, Twilight Princess, that was the beginning and end of the Wii. So you're right, yeah.
Well, because of the port to the Wii U. Wait, say it again now.
Twilight Princess was a launch title for the Wii, and Skyward Sword was like the swan song for the Wii.
The end.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
But here's the thing. But the X factor with Breath of the Wild 2, though, is that it's a game that started as DLC using the same engine.
Right. So it's going to come out faster.
It's very
different.
true.
Yeah. It's totally Skyward Sword was different than Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess was different than Wind Waker before it.
Yeah.
So
I'm just saying, I don't see a third Zelda game on the Switch.
Oh no. Yeah, I agree with that.
Happen.
Yeah, you're right about that.
I don't even think we'll see a cross-gen. I think it will be just straight up Switch 2.
I wouldn't be surprised. This is really lofty thinking, but I wouldn't be surprised if making Breath of the Wild 2 required so much smaller of a team that maybe there's also been a team working on the actual next successor that would be totally different game, different engine, different art style, different everything. So maybe
possible.
It's not crazy when it comes to Zelda. You know, they would put that many people on that franchise. So maybe we can get Breath of the Wild 2 next year, and then we can get the next Zelda that's totally removed from everything Breath of the Wild in the first year or two of the following console.
In my opinion, it depends on like how ambitious Breath of the Wild sequel is, because sure, it's gonna be in Hyrule, but like how much is that gonna be changed? Like, if they're really treating this as like it's gonna be so different that it feels like a brand new game, kind of like Majora's Mask did, then maybe not. But if it's kind of like expanded like 1.5 feel, then I could see that.
And I'll be real, I hate to use the word fear because I'm excited for the game no matter what, but I have a concern that is what it will be. And I still think it'll make a great game and we'll all love it, but that won't feel quite as exciting as something that actually comes off as a true sequel, right? I worry it might be that.
In defense of that, or in defending Breath of the Wild 2, I should say, we got Breath of the Wild at the beginning of 2017. We're already past like that 3-year mark. So especially if the game doesn't come out this year, they're
putting pretty much a whole
it could be
worth of time into it.
Could be a pretty substantial change, so maybe we don't have to worry about that.
Maybe.
But if I remember correctly, Mario, for comparison, right? Like I think Mario Galaxy came out 2007, and then Galaxy 2 came out, I want to say 2010, right?
2009 or 10. I think maybe 2010. You might be right.
I think it matters because it's like
it was 2 years.
Well, when I put in Galaxy,
I think
first
it
thing
was
phones.
I think that because here's the thing: Galaxy 2 was revealed at the same E3 that Metroid Other M was, and that was 2009.
So it was 2.5 years.
So
it came out May 2010. Mario Galaxy 2.
May 2010. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, and then I think Mario Galaxy was like a holiday 2007. So a 2.5 year window between those games. But those games were people saw them as just basically like the same game. Like Galaxy 2 was like almost like an expansion of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like, I mean, Breath of the Wild is such a huge game, right? I hope that it doesn't feel too similar. But
let's say it comes out, holiday 2021. That's what, like 4.5 years.
4.5 years, yeah. It's a good amount of time.
How long did it take to make Breath of the Wild? Like 6 years total, and a lot of that was due to delays because the physics.
Yeah, well, 5 years. 5 years between, because it was 20.
Skyward Sword came out holiday 2011.
It was 2011. You're right.
Yeah.
It was a week after Skyrim. So yeah, it was 2011. So, yeah, 6 years. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That's a year and a half less development time for a sequel. I feel like it might feel like a brand new game at that point.
Yeah, it's all about the content, right? It's just how big is the world? How different is the world? If we're in the same map,
that's the big
as we
thing.
were,
Like, how different is the map?
How
feel?
different
Can
is
I explore
the world?
underwater? Is there like something that makes there be new places to explore? Because that's the biggest thing for Breath of the Wild for me personally is just exploring the environment, finding the shrines, and things like that.
Well, and are there shrines or are there dungeons? How far are they going with that concept in the game too?
Another thing I think is just worth noting is that if you look at the different Zelda games, even with especially I think Majora's Mask is the best example. Look at even though they used a lot of the same assets and the game took like a year and a half to develop, they made sure to make that game feel like a fresh new experience. And you look at every major Zelda game, they come with a completely different art style, and I think they always try to make sure each Zelda game feels very different. So we have these concerns for Breath of the Wild too. I think they're going to make sure that even if it is reusing a lot of the same assets and things of that nature, they're going to try and make this game feel unique. So I'm not too worried, but we'll see. Yeah. So
I be optimistic.
I think we should move on to this Metroid movie discussion. Unless there's anything else you guys want to add to what we're talking about now.
No.
Okay.
I think it's good to do this and move a smidge quick because I know I'm behind for eating food big time.
Yeah. So let's wrap it up. Yeah. Let's wrap it up. So Brie Larson has been saying she wants to play Samus in a Metroid movie, and it's been catching fire on the internet. There's been debate about this, if she's a good fit or not. And that's basically conversation right now. There's no insinuation that a Metroid movie is in the works, but if it were to happen, would Brie Larson be a good fit? And regardless of if she would be a good fit or not, how do you guys sort of envision a Metroid movie playing out, if ever?
As far as Brie Larson goes, I only really know them from Captain Marvel, and I thought that movie was terrible, and I thought she was terrible in it. So I don't know that I want her to do this, but I've heard she's good in other things that, I think she was in The Room. I don't even know what she was in. I've heard she was in The Room, which if I'm not mistaken, it's like a bit of a darker sort of movie than Captain Marvel is. Because her and Captain Marvel, just if that's how she is just generally as an actor, she's not a good fit for Metroid. I need to see her other works to see if she has that talent to do it, simply because it's just such a different feel. So I don't really know. All I can say is I didn't like her in Captain Marvel, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think she'd be a fine fit. I'm not a super huge. Yeah, she looks the part. I think there's something to be said for when an actor of that caliber also is passionate about it. So I think it's very cool that she knows the series, she knows the character, she actively wants to do it. That counts for. It doesn't necessarily make someone the best fit for a job exactly, but it helps. It basically doesn't hurt. It means that there's some passion behind it. I think I didn't really love Captain Marvel, and while she wasn't amazing in the movie, but I don't really think she was the problem with the movie. I think the movie was just kind of weird and just tried too hard with the jokes.
There were a lot
way
of
better
other
MCU
problems
movies
with that movie.
Yeah, man. It was not the best build-up for Endgame to me personally. It just was kind of not a great movie.
And that kind of highlights a point I want to make. Is just that I think that whatever Nintendo does, if they do decide to make a Metroid movie, they're going to make sure it's good. Because Nintendo's super careful about that. That's why they haven't been making movies in years. Yep. Now they're more careful.
Anything that Mario movie they've been working on.
Right. It might not even happen if they don't think it's going to be good.
The animated one? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what's gonna happen is that if we ever do see a Metroid movie, whatever happens, Nintendo's only gonna give it the okay if it's gonna be quality content. And
Are you guys familiar with the one that they were trying to make way back in the day? You guys familiar with that? Because there was a plan.
Was it like during the Wii era?
So
or like further
earlier
back?
than that. This was around 2000 and like probably 2000, 2001.
So I'm not familiar with it.
So there were official plans. It was like a thing. You could probably go to IMDb and still find the old page for it. And the only officially confirmed person was the director, and it was John Woo. I don't know if you guys know who John Woo is.
Oh my
but
god!
He was
I don't know that many directors.
Oh.
He's a big. It sounds like Andres, you know John Woo.
Yeah.
He was a big action director in the late
my
'90s. He did a bunch of Van Damme movies. He was the one who directed Mission Impossible 2, which is considered the bad one. And it is the bad one. I mean, I like it, but it's not. It's the worst of the Mission Impossible.
It is.
Easily it's the worst. But he was just a big action guy of what action movies were like in the late 90s and early 2000s. And he was also, at the time, he was a pretty big name. So it was definitely like there was a lot of clout to the idea. And it was a real thing happening. IGN was covering it, but it never got off the ground. It never got to the story phase. They never announced a single actor or anyone else on the crew. And it was basically Nintendo who was like, this is just not working. There was a lot of rights issues. There was a lot of creativity problems because, kind of like you're saying, Andres, Nintendo is very protective. And this is also coming off of the Super Mario movie, which really changed how Nintendo approached licensing and movie making and all that stuff.
They decided to be very careful moving forward.
Oh, yep. They were like, that was such a disaster. We got to be really careful. So they started the plan with John Woo for a Metroid movie, and it was exciting, but it fell apart early in the 2000s.
That's so interesting because that was a time where Metroid Prime was out. Like, that would have been really good marketing potentially, which I guess sort of highlights the potential if Metroid Prime 4 really kicks off. Maybe that could sort of lead into a Metroid Prime movie or a Metroid movie. Like, there's that potential. Yeah. I'm not going to bank on it, but there's that potential. And going back to the point of just if there is a movie announced, I think it's because Nintendo found the right people and they feel comfortable it's going to be a quality movie. And I think that means that there'll be a good director involved. And even if Brie Larson isn't the best actor, and I'm not saying she isn't, she might be amazing, but I actually I studied theater for years. I'm an actor. So for me, whenever I study film and I look at different actors, I think oftentimes if you can find a great actor in a bad movie. And they may seem like a bad actor because everything else around them isn't good. If it's directed poorly, then you're going to feel like it's fake. You're going to be like, oh, why are they acting in that way? Maybe they were directed to act in that way and it just wasn't natural. Yeah. So,
or it doesn't come together in the editing. I mean, there's a lot of different things.
Right.
And honestly, Captain Marvel to me is that example because I know enough of Brie Larson, having seen Room, which is great, and she's great in it, and having seen Scott Pilgrim was the reference I made recently too. She's in Scott Pilgrim. It's a pretty small role, but she's great in that movie. She has the acting chops. She's not. I said this also on Twitter too. She wouldn't even be probably in my top 5 picks to be Samus, but I absolutely think she could do it. She would bring some name and some clout and some credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just think that, Captain Marvel's not the best litmus test for her because the movie was just really not all that great. And yeah, she wasn't great in it, but I think that's just because the movie was not that good. I don't really think that was Brie Larson's fault.
I think it should also be noted though that even if Nintendo does a Metroid movie, I don't think it's gonna have the same budget as the Avengers. That's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, what movie does?
Even if Brie Larson wants to play Samus, maybe Brie Larson's too high of an asking price. Just look at the Detective Pikachu movie. Yeah,
I think, but
we had one
to be
super
in the
big
movie,
actor.
though.
Everyone else was kind of low key.
I feel like the fact that she wants to be in the movie and the fact that she's worked on things that aren't as big as MCU tells me that I don't think and the fact that the MCU movie she is in did terribly, I don't think she's really in a position to be
it made a lot of money. It did make a lot of money, but but it's incredibly far as the reception though.
Right, it was received horribly. Yeah. Every Marvel movie makes a lot of money. It's just inevitable.
It's a given.
They could release a pile of trash and it'd be like, oh wow.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think if we just consider the concept of just the movie, I will say I think that Metroid could work in a movie because there's been 2 conversations. Should Brie Larson do it? Yes or no? People hate Brie Larson, and so they're just mad about that. But then there's also, could you make a Metroid movie? Is there enough content? Is there enough lore? Is there enough story? And like, I think that a lot of people have turned to me, at least this is what I've experienced as a Metroid fan. People have turned to me and I think expect me to think that it's a bad idea, but I super don't think that it's a bad idea. For a couple of reasons. One of them is even if it's the worst movie ever made, it doesn't affect the Metroid video game. So there's that. It's like a harmless, they're just throwing a Hail Mary. Let's make this movie. It's great. Hooray. It's bad. Who cares? So it doesn't affect the video games. The other reason is because I just truly think that there could be a vision by a talented director and a talented team to make a really cool, atmospheric, quiet, eerie Metroid space movie.
I would
and cover some of the lore. And Alien, which it's based off of,
right.
Example. Yeah.
I would love it if they did something in kind of the style of like the recent 1917, where it's kind of like for the most part, it's like one shot. It's a continuous story, and it's very much like it's not like plot point. It's just an adventure.
A journey. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's just a journey. It's not like most movies where it's like, okay, here's plot point, here's in between point, here's second major plot point, here's the in between stuff. No, it's just like one. I think that could be really cool for Metroid, just landing on a planet, just her exploring the planet and finding,
could be very cool.
Whatever she's looking for in this one, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think the Alien comparison is interesting because a lot of people have made it. I saw you make it, Andres, and you bring it up here. And it's a worthy comparison because of the atmosphere. The big difference, though, when you compare the Alien movies to Metroid is the Alien movies are ensemble movies. Just because Ripley is the star doesn't mean it's like a Ripley movie. Her journey is what we're following, but they are ensemble movies. Every single one of them has a huge cast of people. And Metroid, with the exception of Other M, is not an ensemble story, and she's not a character that relies on other people around her. So to me, the trickiest part is not the special effects. It's not the actress who plays Samus, really. It is literally how do you balance the tone, the atmosphere, and the cast? How many people are in this movie?
I think it's got to be a small cast.
Definitely.
So I think it does have to be like kind of like a suspense sort of horror sort of movie. So it's still like, I think Alien is still like a good movie to sort of like look at. Elements of that should definitely be similar to what a Metroid movie should be, but you're right, it shouldn't be entirely the same. I mean, maybe they could come up with a larger cast, like bring in Federation Force Troopers, maybe have some space pirates that can have dialogue. Heck, I wouldn't even be opposed to Ridley having dialogue. He is technically supposed to be a sentient being. He's not just a rabid beast. He has intelligence.
That's kind of why I wanted it to be somewhere similar to 1917, because in that movie, it's not like most movies, they give you time to like learn your character and its surrounding characters, and they give them like this huge, they try to give them background throughout the whole movie and things like that. Like 1917 is not like that. It's like, this is what's happening, this is what you know, okay, it's just literally like things are happening and it's
around the journey.
Yeah, around the journey. Like I would love it if Samus was exploring and all of a sudden one of the hunters just busts, or she just like comes up on one of the hunters and has to fight them for like seemingly no reason just because they're there. A lot of things like that happened in 1917 where he's just trying to get to where he's going, but all of a sudden, there's troops and he has to like dodge, and there's story in that being told through that in a non-standard way.
I got an idea.
Would work really well for Metroid.
I got an idea. And just one thing I want to armchair analysis, he says, or maybe not even have a big name voice actor like Detective Pikachu or having Ryan Reynolds. I think if you can have one big actor, maybe they could afford to have Brie Larson. Everyone else is sort of like smaller actors. But to my idea,
Pokemon, it actually has a lot of big name actors. Surprisingly enough.
Well, what I was gonna say though is that maybe like it is like just kind of Samus exploring a place, and it's very suspenseful. Like just think like some different horror movies. Like you have like one character who's like in a house and you're trying to figure out what's going on, like except instead of it being a house, it's a large alien world. But you could still have things to mix it up, like maybe there are people but you just see them sparing, like maybe like the reason Samus is going to this alien world is to save a group of Federation troopers. Like she's sent out on a mission to save them, so it does cuts to them occasionally to see what the status of them, and she's trying to get to them. But meanwhile, go on.
And that starts to cover, I just want to interject, that starts to cover like Metroid Prime 2 territory. So there could be a little bit of adaptation of current story. And, there's not a lot of story to the Metroid games, but that is the genesis of her journey in Metroid Prime 2. So you could maybe make that part of, hey, we are adapting some material based on existing lore and story points from the games.
But to that idea, another thing is that, especially with Metroid Prime 1, there's you're chasing Ridley. You after the whole Space Frigate thing, you chase Ridley to Talon 4. And you see him on multiple occasions throughout your adventure. What if Ridley is the big bad, or kind of like a Jaws sort of thing, where it's this scary creature that you're pursuing, and you see glimpses of it throughout the movie. So we don't get to see Ridley entirely until the very end. It's this big, crazy, scary reveal. Kind of your typical cool. Steven Spielberg horror films, or you have this monster and it's a build up to it. I think that could potentially be a really cool suspenseful movie, and I think that could really work well. Now, I guess the question is Nintendo willing to go all in on a suspenseful horror kind of flick? Because they typically don't go mature.
They don't, and I do think they could avoid mature, but I still wonder if they would go the direction it would need to go. I think that the movie needs to have it's going to sound really uppity and pompous to say this, but I think it needs to have kind of an artful approach to it. Mm-hmm. I think that anyone who knows what the Metroid franchise is and what those games feel like, if you picture translating that to film, it's got to be somewhat artistic. It can't be big, loud, bombastic fighting and special effects and monsters and aliens. Those things have to be there, but they have to be artfully done. And so I think of a combination of two very, very different movies that would make the perfect Metroid movie. As far as making a sci-fi adaptation, I think of Alita Battle Angel, which came out last year and was amazing.
I just saw that recently.
Special effects.
Love it.
Did you like it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Huge fan of the source material. That movie was amazing. They nailed it so much, from special effects to story to following her journey as the focus. They just nailed it. So I think if they take those fundamentals, and then there's another smaller movie I'd be curious if you guys have ever seen, called 127 Hours. Does that sound familiar to you guys?
No, but now it's on my list.
I think I have seen it.
Okay, it's
amazing.
amazing.
It's a movie I'm thinking about. I've seen it.
It stars James Franco.
Yes,
and it's the movie about the real life guy Aaron Ralston, who got his arm stuck under a boulder and had to cut his own arm off.
Maybe I have seen
and so
great movie.
The movie's phenomenal. Danny Boyle directed it.
Yeah.
Bro, you have to watch it. It might make you throw up at the end. It actually made me really queasy when I saw it. It's intense.
Okay.
But the movie is, for all intents and purposes, it is a one-person movie. He really carries 95% of the screen time. It's a full-length movie. It's probably an hour and a half, hour 45, maybe 2 hours. It's a full movie that really stars one person and has the scantest appearances of other people before he gets his arm stuck in the first. At the very beginning. But they managed to, by following one person who's not even moving locations, by the way, they told a complete narrative from beginning to end. And it's incredibly fulfilling. You get all the catharsis you need at the end. He gets his catharsis. It's a great, great, great movie. And so that's how you can take a very small one-person cast film and make it a 2-hour story where you follow their journey, but then you mix it with the Alita Battle Angel of, well, we're still making a big, crazy movie with effects and aliens and fighting. So there's a marriage between those two.
A couple things that I sort of thought of as you were saying that. One, I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging for a Metroid movie because you want to see Samus in her helmet, right? She's going to be, you want her wearing her suit. So I think maybe you can balance that with having her in Zero Suit in occasions. But that's going to be kind of challenging. Also, if it is a movie focused on one person, that places more emphasis on that actor being a very strong actor, which I think they can totally find a person to do that.
It's true.
But the other thing that I just kind of want to present to you guys, how do you guys feel about them doing an exposition sort of explaining the Metroid series a little bit? What if they go into Samus's history, they talk about how Ridley killed her parents, how she was raised by Chozo, they do a 10 to 15 minute explanation of the Metroid series and show a flashback. I think a good example of that. Did you either of you guys see the Dragon Ball Super movie for Broly by any chance?
No, that's the only one I've yet to see.
I think it might be the best Dragon Ball movie. But just to illustrate my point, in that movie, I thought they did a great job of sort of explaining the series very early on, or at least the relevant parts for the story, because they go into the past of Goku and Vegeta and Broly, show them as kids, they had a little bit of a drama that happened when they were kids, how they all were sort of sent off to their own different directions, and that was a 10 to 15 minute little beginning that was almost its own contained story, but it set up the rest of the movie. So I would love to see that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would work personally for me for Metroid, simply because I don't think that's how the Metroid stories work. I mean, typically you're just kind of dropped into a scenario and you kind of have to figure out what's going on, which is also another reason why I think it would work for like 1917, simply because that movie is, you just are hit with a scenario and you just have to follow it. Another thing I was going to bring up earlier is that 1917 has a great sense of them being pretty much like completely on their own, like isolated. Like there's soldiers and like, but most of the time they're in like enemy, like, you know, soil. So they're completely isolated and you really get that feeling, which is kind of the same for Metroid, because yeah, there's different enemies and stuff, but there's not really allies and things like that. So it's a very isolating feeling.
It's funny, that is a movie I've been dying to watch. I wanted to see it when it was coming out, and then it was nominated for all these Oscars, and I'm like,
it's
I gotta
so
go see this. And I believe it. We actually have access to it right now, because a friend gave us access to his Vudu account.
Nice.
And he has it, and I'm like, oh, you have 1917? Like, oh, we gotta watch that. So that's now on our docket. I've been dying to see it for so long. And now you're talking about it and you're relating it to Metroid. So I feel like this week or next week will be when we finally get to watch it. So
all these movies have numbers in them. Like I'm like putting a list here of movies I need to watch.
1917.
Have you seen 1917?
I haven't seen either of these movies. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like they could be good, homework for everyone. Just kind of, because we're bringing them up as good comparisons to making a Metroid movie, so maybe watch them. And, they're obviously, neither one is a sci-fi movie, right? So you're not watching it for, oh, this is how you make a badass chick in a suit fight aliens. That's not the approach we're talking about. It's the filmmaking style, right, that we're talking about. And if you watch it through that lens, I'd just be curious what people think, I think that there's something to it.
And I just a thing that it kind of, because John Woo was really good at making action movies, right? Like I guess like at one point they're like, oh, John Woo would be really great to just make a really badass looking Samus, but it probably didn't do a good job of providing that appropriate atmosphere for what the Metroid series is.
Probably not. I can't imagine that. Just his directing style just doesn't seem to fit that.
Little too goofy, not so much story
Way
or
too
character
over the top.
driven. Yeah, I mean, it's great for what it is, but here's the thing. At the time, it felt a little bit better. But since that time, we've gotten Metroid Prime, Metroid Fusion, Prime 2, Prime 3, Other M, Federation Force, Samus Returns, Hunters. Like, there was so much more Metroid games added to Metroid since that was the plan. So it's really hard for us to envision John Woo's direction. And honestly, I don't even know if he's still working. I have no idea if he's still making movies now. I don't know what the last John Woo movie was.
So?
He might be retired.
So on the note of retiring, though, Ronnie Fazio had an interesting question. What do you guys think about Jennifer Hale voicing Samus more? That is, if Retro Studios brings her back for Prime 4. So I believe Jennifer Hale was the original voice actor for Samus in the Metroid Prime series.
Yeah, she did all the grunts.
Yeah, and they were grunts.
I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Like, a lot of people think like if Link ever talks, they probably won't use Link's current voice actor. So I feel like it's kind of the same situation.
Yeah, maybe she would
use the same actor.
That's a good point. But also she's aging, and not that she's like very old, but as you age, your voice changes. So they may not even want to go with Jennifer Hale because maybe they don't want to have Samus sound like a middle-aged woman. They might want her to sound a little younger. So that's something else that they should consider. I don't really know if they will bring Jennifer Hale, but I mean, they're going to have someone play her. I mean, because she's probably going to grunt a little. So
yeah, I mean, if they're not going to do something crazy and suddenly make Samus talk in Metroid Prime 4, which I don't expect them to do, then they could do it. She's going to grunt, and so maybe to get the same woman. I actually met Jennifer Hale a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
At a comic.
That's
cool.
Yeah,
it's really cool. Yeah, and I got to tell her, hey, thanks for Metroid Prime 3. And she's like, oh, yeah, I did that. But I don't know. I just, that's tough to say because it just depends on what the plan is.
Yeah.
We just don't know what they're actually trying to do with Samus's character in that game. I would like to think they're going to keep it the exact same as it was in the first 3 games. Minimal dialogue, minimal interaction from Samus. It's all first person.
I think it works perfectly fine for the game.
Yes.
I think the movie, maybe they could throw in a few lines. I don't think it'd be like, conversation, maybe just like one-liners or something, like one-off kind of like voice lines. Kind of like Mario, actually. Like Mario says stuff every once in a while. Maybe
Well, we
they'll
haven't
is
seen the Mario
Wahoo.
movie yet, though. How are they gonna?
Yeah,
do
we don't
that?
know the Mario movie is even worse, just because Mario is such a unique, like, sounding character.
And am I
that-
crazy? That's an animated
weird.
movie, right? Isn't that what that Mario movie is?
Yeah,
Isn't
it's
that-
gonna be like
Yes.
Despicable Me. Like they're using the same
it's the
studio
same
as them.
people, yeah.
yeah.
DreamWorks, I think.
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
DreamWorks.
Which I
Yeah.
don't know why people. I don't know why people. It's Illumination, not DreamWorks. But I don't
Okay,
know why
Illumination.
people hate on that studio so much. Despicable Me is good.
They're
It's
fine.
animated
I like the
very
Despicable
well.
Me movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
I even like the stupid Minions movie. I was like, this
Yeah.
is fine.
I don't know why people hate the Minions so much, but I feel like they would be great for like Toads. Like Toad's personality, sort of. I feel like they'd be great at making that. Like they'd make such
Yeah.
good Toads.
They remind me of the Rabbids. Is when I first saw
Yes.
the Minions, the first thing I thought of was
Yeah.
the Rabbids.
Yeah, yeah. That'd be fun, but I don't. Maybe maybe they're. It made sense to think that maybe they would have the Mario trailer for the movie revealed, and then they have the Nintendo Park along with the Mario remaster. That all made sense, but this whole pandemic's thrown everything out the window. Like Nintendo might have had plans to do all these different Mario reveals this year.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really know what's going on with that, but I know it's getting late. So any final points you guys want to make before we call it a night?
Nope, I don't think so.
I think
Just
we covered
Nintendo,
everything.
please release some games.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
least tell us what's going on, please.
Yeah.
Cool.
Talk to us, Nintendo. Talk to us.
That would be nice. I'll just check in this one point brought up by Patrick Toe. Jennifer Hale also recorded an intro monologue for Metroid that was cut from the final game. That is interesting. I think I've heard it before, but I only remember it
For
vaguely.
Metroid Prime? Prime 3, maybe?
Maybe. I'm not. I don't know. Jennifer
I don't know.
Hale monologue Metroid. What comes up?
You know what? Someone told me on a live stream a couple days ago something I didn't know about Metroid Prime. Apparently, the Japanese version does have a different intro, so maybe they're talking about a Japanese-only release. I never confirmed if that's true. I've never heard that in all my years of life.
I think I have heard it before.
But maybe that's what it is. Okay.
And I'm looking at a video and it does look Japanese.
Pirate Horde.
Yeah,
Pirate
yeah.
Horde.
There is a
Comments are
narration.
saying Prime 1.
Yeah, there is a narration. So yeah, just search
Yeah.
it, guys. Metroid Prime narration. It exists. Which
I
it's
will
interesting.
do that.
Yeah. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out Rob's channel. Make sure to check out Brandon's channel. Both of their channels are linked in the description below. And thanks for coming, guys. It's been a good time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. All right. Well, take care, guys. Have a great night, and hopefully we get some Nintendo news soon. Hopefully.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Cool. That was fun. That was